Mr. Gaither, would you please call the roll?
Representing Education District 1 and Chair of this committee, Ms. Katie Howard.
Present.
Representing Education District 2, Ms. Loretta Balden.
Present.
Representing Education District at Large Seat 9, Ms. Jessica Johnson.
Present.
I also want to recognize Dr. Ken Zelf, representing Education District 3. We do have our superintendent present, Dr. Battle, as well as our general counsel, Nina Gupta, and of course our lovely CFO, Dr. Bracken. With that being said, Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank everyone for being here today. All right. So do I have a motion to accept the agenda for today's meeting?
So moved.
Second. Thank you so much. All in favor of adopting the agenda for today's meeting, say aye. Aye. Great. We've done that. And now for the February 15th Budget Commission minutes. Is there a motion to accept those or approve them?
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, all in favor? Aye. And that's been done as well. Thank you all so much. All right, time for presentations and discussion. I will turn it over actually to Dr. Battle to get us started officially there.
Good afternoon. I will now have Lisa Bracken, our CFO, go over her presentation.
There you go. Can you hear me okay? Not really. I can't either. There we go. Okay. So today we do have 3 topics that we're going to cover. We expect each of these to have a bit of weighty conversation around them. So we'll probably use the full amount of time today. The first thing we're going to talk about is our compensation strategy for FY 2025. Our Chief Human Resource Officer, Nicole Lawson, will present that to you. I'm going to ground us in some realities of our budget picture today and then tee up some conversations about our FY 2025 budget. There we go. Yeah. FY 2025 budget development process and where we currently are in that process and what we will be doing over the next couple of months as things really ramp up to get us across the finish line. And then finally, Erica Long will be providing our legislative update to cap off our meeting today. So with that, I'll hand off to Nicole.
Good afternoon. Okay. Welcome, Board Committee Chair Katie Howard, board members that are joining us, staff, and to everyone joining us online and in person for today's much anticipated Budget Commission conversation regarding compensation. I am Nicole Lawson, Chief HR Officer, joined by CFO Lisa Bracken, as well as Jennifer Lang, who's our Executive Director of Portal Rewards and Workforce Planning, our new Director of Compensation, Kenneth Grant. He's like 4 days old. Also have Catherine Carter, who's part of the HR team, works on training and development, and the finance staff, as well as our senior cabinet members are here with us in the audience today. All right, so today's conversation will be centered on an overview of our compensation proposal. Where are we now? So we'll go deep into that. We'll also discuss our proposed compensation model and package for FY25. And I look forward to providing your feedback as we finalize and move towards final board adoption. So it's important that we recognize that today's conversation is grounded in our compensation strategy. It's important that we frame our conversation around that because our strategy serves as our ultimate driver for getting to our milestones of graduating students to be ready for college, career, and life. In addition to that, our strategy is centered amongst the 4 pillars that you see on the slide: transparency, being talent-centric, competitive, and responsible. As you may know, our salaries are funded through the state QBE, our Quality Basic Education Funding, and APS local and special revenues. Today, I'd like to give thanks to the board for last year's investment in compensation. We completed a much long overdue compensation study. We invested $59.3 million in compensation upgrades. And in addition to that, we adopted a philosophy that APS would remain within the 75th percentile of the market. Currently, APS is in the 50th percentile of the market for teacher pay. We anticipate that the state will implement the plans announced to increase teacher salaries by an additional $2,500, and our proposals today will include provisions for that increase. APS is currently working with Experience Management Institute to complete a comprehensive annual review and job reclassification process. Given the realities that we're facing with teacher shortages and fierce competition for high-performing teachers in the metro Atlanta area, we are grateful to the board for approving last year's compensation update, but there is much more work to do. We want to kick off our conversations for FY25 by highlighting some key considerations in our review process, which includes our teacher retention data, including teacher voice, local and national compensation and job market trends, feedback from employee organizations, proposed legislation, and projected student enrollment and revenues. We continue to face a fiercely competitive market in the metro Atlanta area. In essence, we are all fishing in the same pond for excellent teacher talent. Given this, our focus is centered on addressing teacher pay gaps within the teacher pay scale. So let's look at where we are today. Today, APS teacher salaries rank 5th or 6th amongst the metro Atlanta area, trailing Cobb, Fulton, DeKalb, and Gwinnett counties for the bachelor's and master's degree pay, and second for specialist and doctorate levels. And the pay gap widens as we get to the midpoint range for the master's levels of teachers. This places APS within the 50th percentile. It is important to note that other school districts made mid-year adjustments to their pay scale for the FY24 school year. To add additional context, we factored into teacher salaries plus strategic stipends offered at APS in comparison to other districts. And as you can see on the slide, we are still positioned at the same place, 4th or 5th. APS has a clear call to action to solve for salary gaps in teacher salaries to prevent mass turnover and teachers leaving to join neighboring school districts, and to be able to attract new talent in particularly our high-need subject areas. And so, the proposals you'll see today will seek to ensure that our compensation structures and decisions are rooted in being equitable for every employee and employee group, fair across positions and locations, competitive and attractive to new and existing employees, consistently administered within the guidelines of our policies and beliefs, and are clear and concise for employee understanding and buy-in. So let's look at our recommendations in the context of their impact to the FY25 budget. Recommendation 1 is to refresh our pay schedule for pay salary structure for teachers. We factored into account the $2,500 increase proposed by the state of Georgia across metro Atlanta districts, plus an average range adjustments to their pay scales, and are proposing that we close the gap between APS and our competitors. This recommendation would position APS to be within the 75th percentile and would allow for step increments to ensure that our teachers' step placement is commensurate with their years of service. The total cost of this recommendation is $35 million. For recommendation number 2, we recognize the need to continue an investment in our strategies around retaining staff in high-needs areas and subjects and in high-poverty schools to position ourselves to be at the best place for day one. Our second recommendation is for a continued investment of $5.7 million in retention stipends for math, dual language immersion, special education, and ESOL teachers, as well as our teachers who serve in our Tier 1 and Tier 2 high-poverty schools. Recommendation number 3 is a little more creative. We are proposing that we continue our diversified recruitment strategy that broadens our base of potential teachers to include those who may need H-1B visa sponsorship. In addition to our turnaround schools hiring incentives, we propose $3,000 of early hiring incentives for our newly hired teachers in special education, world languages, gifted, ESOL and reading endorsed teachers, dual language immersion, art, and CTAE. And new this year, Our teachers who teach advanced placement courses will be eligible for a $3,000 stipend, and we are also investing in early notification incentives for our certified staff. This recommendation would cost $2.5 million for FY25. Recommendation number 4 is to provide a cost of living adjustment and step increase for non-teacher positions. This will maintain our current salary structure, establish a new pay structure for nutrition workers, and make the necessary adjustments to job roles that are not in alignment with the market via our job reclassification process. Recommendation 4 would cost $15.7 million. In summary, our proposals have a total estimated budget impact of $58.9 million and will fund the implementation of a new pay structure for teachers, continue and increase our retention stipends to incentivize teachers in high-needs areas as well as turnaround schools, and support innovation in our hiring strategy as well as expand the APS applicant pool beyond the Metro Atlanta area. With our recommendations considered, we look forward to receiving your feedback as we move toward final adoption of the budget. I want to thank you for your attention thus far, and I look forward to entertaining your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Lawson. I know we have questions. Who would like to start?
So I'm just going to thank you so much for this presentation, and I'm going to start with, I've got 2 questions initially, and there may be more.
Okay.
So when you were talking about our percentile and where we rank, so before we made adjustments, but then our Metro Atlanta counterparts made adjustments as well after us.
Yes.
So are we accounting for mid-year adjustments again this year, or will we make this and then be out of line once our neighbors follow suit?
Yeah.
How have we accounted for the adjustments for the other districts?
Yes, so we made an assumption that they would pass along the $2,500 that the state is proposing, plus a normal cost of living adjustment, and made a recommendation to be beyond that for teachers. That's the most we can do in a forecast. What we factored into that was the $2,500 that the governor is proposing, plus on top of that, a 5% of the top pay. And then we made a cost estimate on what it would cost to get there.
And if that 2,500 is not passed on from the governor, does this recommendation still remain?
Yes,
And please remind me, the 2,500 that is given by the governor, that is not a one-to-one exchange because of how we staff our schools, is that correct?
is it QBE, Lisa, or is it QBE, so it would not be one-to-one?
Okay, so it would cost us more
cost us
than,
more.
and that is accounted for in these totals as well?
Yes, it would cost us more in a couple of ways. The teacher salary scale is far below most Metro Atlanta districts. Also, not all of our teachers are on local revenue. Some are paid through special revenue funding sources. And our pay scale is much higher than the state. So the cost would be primarily within our local revenue.
And then the other thing, just to clarify, these recommendations, 1, 2, 3, 4, they're not options like or, these are additive. You're recommending all of these things, and there's no overlap in any of these, I assume?
No overlap. I'm recommending all of them. And it is not a Cadillac version of a comp proposal. This is what we need to do to remain competitive, because I anticipate that our counterparts will move. As you can see, we're in the middle of the pack right now. If we choose not to move forward with compensation upgrades, we just move further behind.
And then my next question may need to be tabled for later, and that is, how does this recommendation impact the total budget, which I believe there's already a gap? And so how do these increases impact that, and what are we willing to give up? So we'll leave that there as I pass the mic.
Yes, we'll delve into that through the presentation.
Thank you so much. I read it. Board Member Baldwin answered my first couple of questions, but I did have just a few clarifying questions. So I'm looking at slide 15, where we're, like, the recommendation number 3. I'm really excited to see the advanced placement course educator piece in there. Wanted to make sure that includes IB certifications as well, or
So we will look at teachers that are teaching advanced placement courses as eligibility. So we're looking at in campus, find those teachers that are teaching those sections of advanced placement courses, and they'll be eligible for the stipend. So it would include some teachers that may be on the IB track, but I don't know if it's an absolute. So we would have to look at that.
And a follow-up to that would be additional considerations. I know that on some of our schools, they are not able to offer as many courses because they don't have those certified teachers in the space. Is
Yes.
there any additional consideration for high-need schools or additional incentives that we might consider to ensure that those schools have the trained educators that they need in those courses?
Yes, so absolutely. When we talk about our talent management strategy in June, we'll talk about how we're leveraging Title II dollars for leadership development and teacher development. So we're putting dollars into ensuring that our teachers can get these endorsements without it feeling like, one, a financial burden, but two, that they have quality instruction and getting them to be able to pass the necessary tests to obtain these assessments, these endorsements. So we're focusing on teacher development as well, but I will talk about that further in our talent management presentation in June.
And then, I already really framed the question well, just around kind of how we're comparing to other districts. I'm just curious, how much more would we have to spend to be certain that we're 1 or 2
Yeah,
in this
so I
district,
think-
so that we don't have to revisit this again next year?
Yes, well, compensation is fluid. I won't say that we probably won't have to visit it again. I'm sure as soon as APS moves, so will other districts. But what we will do is a mid-year checkpoint to see where we are in comparison with other school districts. And we will do this annual review that we do every year to determine what we need to do to remain competitive. That's why the philosophy of being in the 75th percentile that you all adopted last year is so important, because compensation is fluid, and we do need to keep a keen eye on what our competitors are doing in order to ensure that our teachers remain with Atlanta Public Schools.
Thank you so much.
Real quickly, because I definitely want to get to Dr. Zeff's questions. Going back to slide 14, these high-need areas,
Yes.
I know we're focused on that with the stipends, and of course, this compensation strategy would be greatly helpful there. Would this be covered in the presentation in July around identifying like what more may be needed in these areas?
Yes, so we'll take a deep dive into, so these recommendations are rooted in data. We look at our time to fill data. How long does it take us to seal the deal? I like to call these stipends deal closers and teacher keepers, right? So the retention stipends are for us to keep the staff that we have. And these are based off of feedback from how long it takes, the number of teachers that turn over in these roles, as well as feedback from principals. So we started staffing conversations with principals in January, and based on their feedback of where we think we need to have strategic alignment in their needs, we decided where the high needs areas are. But we'll look at the data and go deep into that in June.
That'll be great, so in June.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic, so there could be more coming. I mean, looking at,
Well,
I mean, yeah.
if there's a need to adjust, we will always adjust, but that would require another budget adjustment. So I don't want to make the assumption that that's an automatic.
But for us, knowing that this is not a one-time thing, plus we need to make this sustainable.
Yes.
And looking at the stipend comparison with like Fulton County, they actually have a higher stipend allotment for high needs areas.
Yes.
I think that's important to note. And then again, this may be covered in June, just additional feedback from educators around, what does help retain them?
Yeah, so we just completed the Talent Pulse survey for teachers, and we are, as an administrative team, delving deep into that. That led us to the deeper investment in teacher development. That was a clear call out for our teachers. They also want more adequate planning time. So working with our principals on how they develop their master schedules to give teachers enough time for preparation is something that was a clear call out as well.
Extremely valuable feedback. Looking forward to diving into that more deeply. And I do want to point out, there's an index in the back. Aretta, this is follow-up also to the questions that were asked. I wanted this information as well. So thank you for asking about the different entitlements, as well as a breakdown of the different sections in the budget. I'm going to pause there. I want to pass it over to Dr. Zeff. I'm so sorry. I do want to recognize that we have Board Member Briscoe Brown on the call. We have Board Member Brooks, and we also have Board Member Mitchell, correct? Or Chair Mitchell. Got everybody? Great. Thank you all for joining us.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Sorry. Thank you for this presentation. I know it's hard to put all this data together from all the different districts, and it is really informative. I have one tactical question, then one more sort of global question.
Okay.
So recommendation one, which is the bulk of the recommendation,
Yes.
you're saying you're implementing a new pay structure. Is that new pay structure just putting more money into step and column, or is it a revision of the way? When you say new pay structure, what do you mean?
Yeah, so it is still step and grade.
Okay.
Our team, with our new compensation director, as well as our executive director of total rewards, we are reimagining and working with other school districts on what future pay structures would look like, but that's not within this model. The model would be still step and grade.
So it's your new pay structure. What you mean is you're pushing,
rates of
you're just
pay.
pushing more money through the step
Yes.
and column or step and lane system. Okay.
Yes.
That-
Pay step structure.
Got it. Okay. Just wanted to get clear about that. So then, just globally, how are we doing on retention? Like how?
Yeah.
So we're making implicit in this is a big bet around this theory of action of 1 to 2. Obviously, teachers, that's all we do, right? We don't make anything. We just
Yeah.
have teachers, and so we want to make sure teachers feel supported.
Yeah.
How are we doing? How are we doing?
So we increased in retention in comparison to last year. So we made gains. There's still work to do as far as one, making sure our structure remains competitive in pay. We know that's a given within the budget structure. But we also need to invest in leadership development. Last month, Dr. Battle brought a budget adjustment with Title II specifically for leadership development. That is our number one retention factor based off of feedback from teachers.
So when you say that's your number one
Retention factor.
retention factor, more than compensation?
More than compensation, but that doesn't mean that compensation isn't important.
Correct.
Our teachers are saying that their number one factor for remaining with Atlanta Public Schools is built upon the leader in their school building.
Right, which I think Paige does surveys that say the same thing. It's
Yeah.
like 60% of teachers leave because of the work conditions, 30% leave because of compensation. Certainly compensation is important. Are we making is our investment matching that data? In other words, I know we're going to get to budget in just a little bit, we're making a really big bet in compensation.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to make sure are we being responsive to the data?
Like this isn't our only ball. It's not. So, which is why we made a mid-year adjustment to leadership development. We looked at the data. We have 30 0 to 3 year principals, novice principals in our district. We wanted to make sure our investment in their development matched that. Being a principal is difficult the first couple of years. So they'll be attending the Relay Graduate School of Education Leadership Academy along with their principal supervisors this summer. We do believe that will help. Also making sure that our associate superintendents are guiding them, coaching them, and training them along the way. And there's a structure that allows for that growth and development that's one, fair to our principals, but two, that our teachers feel that level of growth and development within them. So no, it's not our only ball. We are focused on development as well.
Well, I've seen the end of the presentation, and we're going to have to make some tough trade-offs.
Yes.
And so I just want to
can say for development, we are going to leverage our Title II dollars. So we're leveraging Title II dollars for our development strategy.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zeff. And then we have some questions from Cynthia, and then we'll circle back with the committee. Is that okay?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I can.
Good. Thank you. Just a couple of questions. My brilliant colleagues have already asked most of mine. The first one, though, is going back to your recommendation number 1 about making sure that every employee is on the correct step.
Yes.
When I joined the board in 2014, we worked really hard to get everybody on the right step. The previous board and administration had instituted a pay freeze, which resulted over the years, as if I remember correctly, in new teachers literally coming in at a higher pay grade than some of our experienced teachers. And it took us a few years to sort that out, but we finally did. And so my question is, how far off of that have we gotten, and how hard will it be to get back?
So we haven't gotten off track. This isn't to ensure that we remain on track. So it's just a call out that we will have step increments for teachers to move to the appropriate step. So what will happen if we don't do it is that it will get back off track.
Okay. I wanted to make sure we didn't have that same kind of mess again.
No,
the second one is on the slide with your creative solutions or creative recommendations.
Yes,
I don't know whether you can go to that or not.
I'm there on recommendation 3. Can you see it?
I can't, so, but if you can, that's fine. I would echo Board Member Johnson's, comment about including IB certified teachers in the educator incentives for AP. I know what it is, but could you just briefly explain what the H-1B visa is?
Sure.
And by the way, I think that's a great call out as well.
Thank you. Yes, so H-1B sponsorship allows for us to be able to recruit teachers that are certified teachers in other countries that are seeking to come to the United States to teach. This is key for our dual language immersion program in particular, but also for very specialized areas within the career technical and education realm of the work, as well as ESOL teachers. We have about a little over 30 teachers that are on H-1B visa sponsorship, and it's very costly. And some of the cost has to be incurred by the employer, that meaning that the applicant cannot take on that cost per Department of Homeland Security.
I appreciate that is a very creative recommendation, and I appreciate it. 2 of my children's best teachers they ever had were here on H-1B, on the H-1B program, and I think particularly for high-level math and science teachers, it's also a good way to recruit those when we may not even be able to find them.
Yes.
So as well as supporting our DLI and our language programs generally. I think that's all I've got, Katie. Thank you.
Thank you. Retta, you had some other questions?
Yeah, so I have one clarifying question Dr. Zeff did point out to me, and I'm now curious. All of these recommendations, are they all for fiscal year 25? Or are you looking to implement some of those this year?
No, FY25.
Okay, there might be a typo then on page 25.
On 25?
Yeah, it has fiscal year 24, so I just want
Oh, okay.
We were just, you might have been, creative and
Yes.
recommending something early, so we just wanted to
No,
confirm.
it's for FY25.
But I wanted to go back a little bit on what Dr. Zeff was talking about in
Yes.
terms of is this our only bullet?
Mm-hmm.
And y'all, had a conversation about some things. I just want to highlight those. So what did you say is the main reason why people stay?
Leadership.
And is that also the main reason why people leave?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I was asking him, are those interchangeable or is that the same? So, okay, that's good to know. And then what was the 60-30 that you said something about 60% and can you?
Yeah, there was a survey that the Professional Association of Georgia
yes,
Educators, they did a survey of why teachers leave, and 60%-ish said because of working conditions, and 30% said because of compensation. But I think Ms. Lawson's right. It's not compensation is it's a multivariate equation, right? I
Yes.
mean, when the working conditions get hard, that's when you look at your paycheck.
Yes.
And you say,
Is it worth it?
is it worth it? And so I think these two things move in the same direction.
Yes.
And you can't just write big checks. I think that the lesson is, what I took from the survey is that you can't just, if you give teachers an extra $1,000 or $2,000, by November, that's not enough to keep folks excited about the work.
If the working conditions.
If the
aren't
working
right.
conditions
It's
are
like, what are we doing in terms of impacting our culture?
Yeah, so-
As well. And so thank you for calling that out. And I also wanted to know if you could highlight this, because it's an assumption, I don't have that study in my head, that when teachers leave, they're not necessarily going to another district that pays more. Where are we seeing our teachers are landing when they leave?
Yeah,
Are
so
they
we
staying
would-
in the profession, or are they going somewhere else?
When we will parse through their reason codes for leaving as we do the presentation, but we also do an exit interview with employees that want to do one. Some of them say that they're leaving the profession. Some of them saying they're leaving because they want to have better working conditions. So it just varies, but we'll parse through all of that in June. It will run the gamut depending on where people are individually. But it is important that we're doing our best to ensure that we have a culture that has a message that they don't have to go to grow, that we're investing in their own personal development as well as leadership development, which is why you'll see the majority of our strategy will be built upon that for talent management.
Excellent, thank you.
So I guess to that point around the working conditions, I know in one of our previous meetings, we were discussing some of the ESSER funds that were being used for teachers around like the health and wellness pieces.
Yes.
And since those funds are running out, just want to confirm that nothing has changed, that we still have found resources to replace that in the budget to ensure that teachers have those support, are able to get those supports.
Yes, absolutely. A couple of things in the wellness bucket. One, the state will still continue to offer state EAP resources. We have opted into that for FY25, but we're also working with other vendors to supplement the level of support that our teachers say that they need. They want more on-demand support, so we're looking at relationships with BetterHelp and Headspace to provide certain resources to teachers that they can get on demand. They don't want to drive someone somewhere else to get therapy. They want to have it in their house in a way that feels confidential. So we're working on that. And we're also continuing to invest in financial well-being for them, working with banks on building credit repair, as well as help with loans.
No, great questions from my colleagues, and this is an area, I was thinking about closely too, and looking at this report. It's not just the money, we've known that, so what else are we doing to invest in this area? And calling out the leadership development for principals
Yes.
to help build that climate and culture, and principals being even more knowledgeable about the supports needed to strengthen the culture for their schools. And I've thought about this one as well, Aretta, around the cost of housing.
Yes.
And we're looking at being the right partner in the affordable housing space. So
Game changer.
that's one right there. Really want to hear the feedback from educators, all our employees in that space. So that will be touched on in June?
Yes.
Okay. We could spend all day. You
I
can tell
know.
we're ready
We
for
want
June.
to HR nerd out. I know.
But no, this is great. You know we're ready for it. But I do want to call out the investment in leadership principles. That's a cost. Also, any mental health supports for our educators and staff that you'll be talking about in June. I absolutely hear the call to make sure we're supporting educators and getting additional certifications. But we're going to have to make choices.
We are going to have to make
Like,
choices.
what is our area of highest need? So again, going back to what slide 14,
Yeah.
in those areas, so really delving in deeper to understand like where we have really got to focus in to make sure we have educators teaching these subjects and that they're well supported. That doesn't mean we stop doing other things completely, but we're going to have to shift, and we are going to have to make some hard decisions. So
Thank you for
thank
your
you
support.
so much for that presentation. Absolutely. Okay, sorry. Board Member Brooks, we're ready for you. You there?
Hey, thank you so much for calling me in. Ms. Lawson, thank you so much for your presentation.
You're welcome.
I had a question of clarification. Do we know what percentage of our teachers are leaving for other careers as opposed to leaving for other districts?
So in our presentation in June, we'll parse through, look at the numbers, because teachers are still making decisions on their contracts right now. So in June, we'll have a more finalized look at that, and we'll show their reason codes for leaving.
So do we have historical data on that from last school year or 2 school years ago?
Yeah, for last school year, there were quite a few teachers that left for other reasons, meaning they didn't want to disclose. Some actually noted that they were leaving the profession, and some left due to wanting to have better working conditions. So it runs.
Do we have any concrete percentages on that?
We do, and it's actually in the talent management presentation for last June. I think there's a link. Do you have the link in the appendix? I believe it's in the appendix, and if you link on that presentation, click on that link, you will see it broken out.
Thank you. And as far as the compensation data from the other districts, is this based on assumptions for next school year, or is this based upon presentations that other districts have already disclosed to the public?
Yeah, assumptions. So we don't have the intel on where they will land within their budget constraints or budget parameters. We're all working on it at the same time.
Do we have an understanding of what our savings has been from the increased retention from some of the initiatives that have been implemented since last year to this year that has increased retention? Do we have an idea of what the savings are from increasing our retention?
No, we would have to run those numbers.
Okay, I would implore us to do that, because I think a lot of times it's easy for us to look at teacher compensation as a cost, or increases in teacher compensation as a cost, as opposed to looking at it as a savings from being able to increase our retention. I would encourage us to take a look at that. Also, I do appreciate that you brought up the idea for us to do a mid-year adjustment, because my understanding is that's not something that we've done in the past, and it is essentially the reason why we've not been able to maintain a 75% to 100% standing in the metro area. And I want to make sure that, Atlanta, my personal preference is that we are number one in compensating our teachers in the metro area, but also that we are number one in improving and sustaining healthy culture in our schools. I think that has to be top. As an educator, y'all can see I'm in my classroom right now. Many of my colleagues who I teach with have come from APS. And one of the main reasons that they'd be willing to take a pay cut to come here to Clayton is a culture issue.
Yeah.
And it's something that I think we have to be intentional about. Thank you.
Absolutely noted. Well, if we don't have additional questions for me, I'm going to turn it back over to Lisa to go deeper into our presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Lawson. We look forward to, obviously, the rest of the meeting and then June. Thank you so much.
All right, so with the next 4 slides, we're going to tell a bit of a story about our current budget situation and where our money is going. So every year when we begin this compensation conversation, I get a bit of sticker shock. I have to sit down, take a glass of water. When I first started here, $20 to $30 million was a good compensation strategy. We would earmark that at the beginning of the budget cycle, and we would move forward. But every year, as our competitors continue to increase pay, it just becomes more and more of our expenditures each year going towards salary compensation. So we wanted to do a deep dive to understand why and where our dollars are going. So I'll walk through all 4 of the next slides, and then I'll pause for questions. So the first place I started at looking is our staff to student ratios. So what this chart is doing is pulling data from the FY23 annual financial reports from some of our neighboring districts. So we look at districts that have similar demographics to ours, such as DeKalb, Clayton. We look at very large school districts like Cobb and Gwinnett. We look at very small school districts like Fayette. So we're comparing ourselves against a few different districts. We're looking at the FY24 budgets for DeKalb and Clayton. Their financials weren't on their websites yet. So what this table is showing is our enrollment, the enrollment for each of those districts against the total staff at each of those districts. And then in blue, we're showing the staff to student ratios. So in APS, we have about 6.02 students for every staff member. And that compares to our neighborhood districts that run between 6.73 and 7.96. So at an average salary, which includes benefits, this is the average employee average salary cost for all of our positions, you can see that the differential, so if we were staffing at the similar ratios as our neighboring districts, we would have between 886 and 2,000 fewer employees, and the district would spend 79 million to 182 million less on these compensation strategies, or to repurpose and reallocate. I do want to point out that this slide is really overstating our ratio, because this is including all of our students and all of our staff. Only about 26% of our 26% of our students are in charters and partners, and the staff is not accounted for here. So on the next slide, we drill into that a little bit further. And so for this one, I've removed a proxy for the charter and partner enrollment from each of the districts. Because every school district reports differently in their annual financial reports, what I'm doing is using their average school size by the number of charters that they have and backing that out. So it's not the actual enrollment, but it will give us a good estimate. When we do that, we see that our APS staffing ratio actually drops to 4.36 as compared to 6.34 or up to 7.9 in our neighboring districts. With this ratio, a reduction of 2,600 to 3,700 staff would have us more comparable to our other districts, and the redistribution of funds would be between 234 and 335 million. So those are huge numbers, and I think every time that we're talking about compensation, we have to come back to this and look at this, because our compensation is being spread over far more employees than our neighboring districts. The analogy is, when we, I was wondering if I was going to use my peanut butter ratio, and I'm going to use the peanut butter. So if you take a spoonful of peanut butter and you put it on a Ritz cracker, it's going to be a big blob of peanut butter, right? If you spread it over a piece of toast, it's going to have a nice smooth layer. If you spread it over a pizza crust, you're not even going to know it's there. So what we do when we are looking at our per pupil spend, we look like a peanut butter and cracker district. But when we look at our spend against our staff and we look at it against our number of schools, we are a peanut butter to a pizza crust district. It is spread much, much thinner over those areas. When we drill down into our number of school sites, which is the next step, we can see that our average number of students per school site is also much smaller. So the comparison is between 578 students at our APS, average APS school. That ranges to 672 to 1280 at other school districts. If we had school sizes that were at similar ratios, we would have between 12 and 48 fewer schools. And again, just like in our last two slides, this is actually being generous, because this is not including our campuses that have two sites, which have double administration overhead, transportation running to both of those sites, dual campus, our ninth grade academies, our satellite buildings, our programs like ACCA and AVA. So those aren't even necessarily in these allocations, so it could be even larger. So I ground all of that, I ground us in this as I move to the next slide, which is where our spend breaks out. So when we are looking at our per pupil spend, which is at $19,700 for FY 2024, which is higher, well, this is 23 data, which is higher than our other districts by about $3,700 to $8,000 more than the other districts on a per pupil basis. we see that we are spending on a dollar-wise much higher. But percentage-wise, how those dollars break out across our various support functions is very similar to our neighboring districts. We are within the norm, range of norm, for our spend in our general administration, business services, central office support services. And the reason that that's important is as we are thinking about closing gaps and making reductions and getting leaner and finding trade-offs, this is not in any way stating that our central office is as lean as it could be, and also it is proportionate to serving the instructional, pupil services, and staff services as other districts. So when we go too heavy into those areas without looking at the other side of the equation, which is the number of staff and schools that are supported by our central office, we do have to think about the trade-off of services that we can provide and where we get to that tipping point of if we're still serving the same number of staff and the same number of buildings with far fewer people, how do we continue that level of service and support? So I'll pause here to see if there's any questions or comments or concerns around these data, and then I'll move us forward into the FY25 budget conversation.
Great. Thank you for setting it up like this. Committee members, any questions right now? I have a couple, but Ken, you go first.
This is pretty compelling, right? What is so what we're basically saying is we're spending 30% more, and we're getting outcomes that are not justifying that 30%. What I've read through the rest of the presentation. What's the recommendation from the administration?
Yeah. So this does not have a recommendation in it. This is bringing awareness, because I think that sometimes this is an initiative where APS is putting most of its money, and I don't know that we're doing it consciously, right? So the small neighborhood schools, the really small, low student to staff ratios could be a fantastic selling point. It could be the thing that we go all in on for kids, right? That's what we do. That's our strategy. But we should be asking those two questions, right? So where's the data to support that this strategy that we're investing hundreds of millions of dollars in is providing students with what they need? And secondly, are we willing to make those trade-offs? Because if we're going all in on neighborhood schools and small student to staff ratios, then we need to say we might not have the highest compensation as we're comparing to all of our neighborhood schools. That might be a trade-off. We might trade off, we don't have one of everything in every building. We don't have every program in every building. We have to start thinking, if we're going to continue to do this, we're not going to be able to continue to look the same in other areas. So I think it's either just being conscious that this is a method for us moving towards our student outcomes, or if it's not working, we do need to think about what we do differently.
Appreciate that, Aretta, and then I have some too.
This is a great chart, and what I'd like to point out is we're looking at numbers on paper, but when you look at the different counties, what's not included in here are the differences in the makeup, in the populations, and in the communities that are serving. So I caution us that this is not direct correlation, right? That there are other variables that are not necessarily accounted for on this chart. So to just look at these numbers and to compare one county to another, just know that there are other nuances that are included in addition to the allocation of funds. I just want to make sure that we have all that top of mind.
Agree. I do think these districts all have similarities to us too, which is important for us to look at some reasonable comparisons. And our job, of course, as a board is to see what's having the most impact for our students, like what is increasing outcomes. And that's what this is going to force us to do even more of and look more closely at. So if we're committing to spending the money that's needed to increase compensation for the current structure we have, we need to see how that's having the most impact. Do you want to go back to central office cost around, and the structure is and of course you put it much better than I am going to, but central office is supportive of adults, adults in schools. And looking at the comparison with other systems, is that really how everybody does it? I mean, is there any flexibility or change that could come from central office in how we serve our schools and our students? I mean, I'm being general, but just knowing that it seems like that's the only way right now. Is there flexibility there that we're contemplating?
So just in the mode that we serve our schools in?
I mean, yes, I guess basically it's been explained to me that central office is set up in such a way that it's based on the amount of adults and the number of schools.
Yeah.
Are we looking to change the way that's done, considering where we are right now?
Well, I think just if you look at the functions of our central office, I just speak personally for my work. We believe in finance that if we are serving the staff, then they are freed up to concentrate on the students. They're not worried about where their next paycheck is coming from, if they can get answers about their health care, if they can have the supplies that they need from procurement, if they have access to federal dollars, then they can concentrate on what they're supposed to be doing, which is working with our students. So my staff is set up in order to support the number of staff in the district. Doesn't matter how many students those staff are then supporting, that's how many calls we're gonna get. When we're thinking about our maintenance or our facilities teams, the number of buildings drives the central office overhead to support those buildings. And so if they are serving, or if they're having to maintain twice as many buildings, that's what their cost is gonna be. Same with transportation, every site that they have to drive to. So it doesn't matter how many students are on the bus, if they've got to drive to a site, that is the same cost. So it does make more sense for us to look at our cost, at least through this lens on the occasion per pupil, I think still has its place. But there is some of our work that really we have to think about based on the number of staff and facilities that we support. Now, our charter system status does allow us to think differently about what we maintain at the central office and what schools maintain for their administrative overhead, right? So when we were originally, way back when, talking about SSF, we were considering things like, should custodian or custodial services be a part of the school budget? And where we landed was when there's a tipping point, right? Site-based discretion can give a lot of opportunity for innovation and flexibility and for schools to use those resources in new and innovative ways. And also, it could just be an additional burden or one more thing that a principal has to think about while they're trying to do what we believe is the most important thing, which is getting students prepared for a college career and life. So I think, we do think about what sits at the central office, what sits at the schools. There's, coding things that we could do to make it look like it's more at the schools, but I mean, really, every school district is doing it about this way. As far as the functions, the budget by function, which you see on this page, and is in the key breaks out, the appendix breaks out the key for what is in each of those functions. That is set by the state. So every district in Georgia has to code their spending by these functions, which makes comparison very easy for spend. It's harder with staff. We don't have to report staff by function in the same way, so I don't have the same, how are those positions broken out by each of those functions? But we can see the spend here, and that is standardized.
And that's all very helpful. It's peeling back the layers and understanding, we all know generally what central office supports, but you're clearly pointing out some things that, yes, we feel like the most effective, efficient way to do it is through support from central office, and we don't want to add another burden to schools. They have enough to do. But just understanding if there's flexibility in those areas, but not creating additional challenges.
And frankly, there's a lot of efficiencies too. So the more we're able to negotiate contracts for the district much more effectively than individual schools might be able to. So we do gain efficiencies by having certain functions maintained centrally.
And certainly we don't want to, that's not up to me, but I don't think that sounds like a great idea. But any other, support services, recognizing they're very important, like you said, by having the support from central office, that gives some more time for educators to do their job more effectively and we want to ensure that is happening. And just going back to the priorities we hear, especially when we're talking with high schoolers, around course selection, support for extracurriculars and other things, and like nutrition is another one that we have taken on to say that's a priority. Just again, stating our priorities and, how we're going to have to make decisions based on where we are. And going back to Dr. Zeff's question, like, what are the proposed strategies to close the gap that we haven't gotten to that exact slide yet, I don't think. So I will pause there, moment of suspense for questions from my colleagues.
So I just had a clarifying question on slide 21, where it kind of breaks down the staff to student ratio. In the note section, you had that it does, that the other districts have the in-house nutrition. Now that we are planning to bring our nutrition in-house, how does that change? Kind of what
It will
APS
go
looks like?
even lower. So some of the neighboring districts that we're comparing up here, like Fulton, they have in staff nutrition already. So their 500 nutrition workers are in their staff right already in here. Ours are as contractors, they're not even reflected in our numbers. So this 4.36 will be even lower.
Thank you.
Is there anybody online with questions, Pierre? We good? And just restating that we set goals and there are priorities in those goals. That's extremely important too in this process. Ken, do you have anything right now? You good? Okay, next slide.
Alrighty, so that being said, we're going to try to keep spreading that peanut butter for FY 2025. So this slide is going to walk through where our budget is when we closed the budgets on March 8th. So our team has done a ton of work since this slide was prepared. We'll show you some of that work on the next slide. But because we are building in a new system this year, we're using OpenGov to build, we're still working out how to make some of these changes in the system. So while I'm maintaining everything on spreadsheets, the team is getting it built into our system of records so that we can quickly and easily give you those charts of spend by function, spend by object, the slice and dice charts that we know that we need. So for now, we just wanted to show where we are and some recommendations for how we're going to start closing this gap. So for local revenue, we are assuming about a 5.82% increase as of this chart. Increases in the Fulton and DeKalb Digest, our TAVT increases, and the TAD pilot payments, our tax allocation district intergovernmental agreement negotiated some payment in lieu of taxes. It's the pilot piece of that we'll continue to receive. The state, again, we don't have the FY 25 QBE yet. We're hopeful to have that soon. But we are assuming the increases, that we're assuming that pass along of the $2,500 per teacher will be in the QBE. We do know that there's some increases to like the transportation categorical grant that have been recommended. However, we do anticipate that most, if not more, than the increases will be offset by an increase in our local fair share. The other small increase, decrease in our E-rate and their transfers. That's the general fund transfer in from special revenue for our consolidation of funds. And so our fund balance, for this slide, we're assuming no usage of fund balance, which is another reason why you see a big gap here. For the traditional schools, I will call out that for all of these line items for the expenditures, state health and the TRS have been pulled out because we wanted to show those increases separately. So traditional schools are about up 7 million or 1.74%. That's the push-in of the literacy coaches, the 1.0 counselor equivalent at each school, and it is offset by some of those enrollment declines that we've been talking about with our SSF formula. The charter schools, we see an increase of about 6.6% at this point, and again, that's based on enrollment and a share of new and additional revenue. Partner schools are up 12.59. Their calculation is based on the per pupil for expenditures. Central office for this is less state health and TRS and all of the initiatives below central office that we've pulled out. But we do see an overall decrease at this point in central office. For nutrition, the ERP system and Readers Are Leaders, we've highlighted these. These are our 3 new pilot initiatives going into FY 2025. At this point in time, we were requesting 26.3, 13.8, and 6.5 of additional funding to support those. Again, part of that Readers Are Leaders as in the traditional schools budgets already as additional positions there. We've had a request for an increase for summer school as the ESSER funds are rolling off, and part of summer school was funded in ESSER in the last 3 years. And again, an AVA Direct program that was funded through ESSER will roll off. Transportation, we see an increase. We're reviewing those allocations, again, also with safety and security. Nicole's already talked to you about compensation. There was a piece of her compensation presentation that included recurring stipends. So stipends we would fund again for next year. Some of those stipends, but those are already embedded in our base, and we're only showing the increases here. So we were able to, that's why you see 54 million and not the full request of 58. Also, we see the large, utilities, we see an increase there based on current year usage. State health is up because of a rate increase. TRS is up because of a rate increase. Both of those, though, the team is reviewing. We believe that those rates are too high. And then the pension, that's our annual 3% scaling. So based on the new revenue that we are seeing come in and the expenditures that we currently have built into the budget, we're seeing a 2% decrease in funding and a 14% increase in spend, which is creating a gap of about 191 million. I don't want to pause for even a second on that big scary number because we are doing a lot of work to close that. So our first recommendation would be at minimum to cover those 3 new initiatives, the ERP, the nutrition plan, and the Readers Are Leaders pilot with fund balance. So again, that previous slide did not include a usage of fund balance. We believe we can use fund balance for these. We are currently doing that analysis of the benefits increases, and we believe those are overstated by about 12 million. Our new software has built into its applied benefits to every employee, whether they take them or not, whether they're eligible or not. And so we feel like we can do some significant savings there. We're looking at the summer school requests to see if there's an opportunity to fund some of that through a different federal funding source. And so we'll be continuing to look at that. We're looking at our central office. Even though we do see an overall decrease in the central office, individual departments still had increases. We're going back to work with those departments to level set to at least know more than what they had in the current year. We are analyzing that compensation request against what's already been included in the school budgets. When we build SSF, we build a 3% into that just because we know that that's about a minimum of what we'll do. So that's already pushed into the school. So we can come off of the compensation proposal by that. And also it includes all positions. And again, this is just general fund, so the special revenue positions don't have to be covered through this piece. We're revisiting the utilities request and also the transportation. We believe there might be some redundancies in how we've budgeted for salaries and also in safety and security. With the grant coming in from the state next year, we anticipate that grant. We believe we can push some of the additional requests into the grant. So we're thinking creatively about that. So so that closes the gap by 106 million. So that's the preliminary work our team can do. It's the low-hanging fruit from our office. And so the other piece that just came in yesterday, actually, is we were on our MRESA call with the fellow CFOs of other districts, and some of our neighboring districts are staying very optimistic about local revenue and digest increases. And so while we've increased in ours, I think about 4 to 5%, they were increasing 7 to 10. So we do feel like we can come up another percentage point or 2 on our local revenue, which would bring this gap from 85 closer to around 50. And so the preliminary budget gap that we'll be taking to senior cabinet next week is around 50 million. And that's when we'll start those conversations. We've trimmed everything that we can trim. This is where we start having the really hard conversations. And so with that, I will just one more slide before I pause for questions, the impact to fund balance on all of these different proposals. So when we ended FY 2023, we ended with a fund balance of about 30% of expenditures. The FY 2024 initial budget, or where we are today, contemplated the usage of about 71 million of fund balance against our current expenditures. That would be about a 19% fund balance. So we have two different proposals for FY 2025 based on how much of this year's fund balance we actually use. And so I've mentioned at a couple of different board meetings now that we don't anticipate using the full 71 million of this year's fund balance. So the budget, the column to the far right assumes that we're using only about half. So if we use about half of the fund balance that we budgeted in the current year, plus the 58 million that I'm requesting for next year for the new initiatives, we'll be sitting right at 15% of expenditures, which is not quite at the recommendation of GFOA's 2-month expenditure benchmark, but it is right at the cap of the 15%, and it exceeds the board's no less than, which is 7.5%. So with that, I will pause for any questions that you might have.
Retta?
Thank you for this round of the presentation, and I do have some questions. So first, on the use of fund balance, you had identified 3 areas, and I just would like to confirm that the areas that you are recommending be funded by fund balance, these are one-time costs, or are
They're not
these
one-time
recurring costs?
They're not one-time, but the nutrition fund, we do anticipate the bulk of this will be a startup cost, and we've asked for a plan for how over time it will become, there will be less of a burden on the central office, or the general fund, I'm sorry, not the central office, on the general fund. And so we're working through what that long-term plan would be, but in this first year with the startup cost, we're comfortable using the fund balance for that. ERP is similar. It's going to be a 2 to 3 year large investment, and then we will see that drop off. And then the readers are leaders. We don't anticipate that will be one time. Pieces of it will be. So the stipends that we're paying for all the teachers to do the training, once they've completed the training and those have been paid out, that won't be a recurring stipend. There will be a piece that we have to fold into the general fund as new teachers come on and need to do that training, but that should be a much smaller piece in the out years that we can fold into the general fund.
I would like to see a breakdown of that money that you are looking to spend. How much is a one-time cost versus how much we will have to find in the budget in previous years? Because this is a great quick fix now, but it sets us up in the future for some liability in terms of
Sure.
having to pay for that. So I'd love to see that breakdown.
And I will just call out that if people are adding these 3, there is additional one-time cost that we're recommending to use fund balance for. This 58 million is higher than the sum of those 3 because we have other areas that we know we can identify one-time cost.
Excellent. So if we can have a chart that just breaks that down the next go around, that would satisfy my curiosity. I also want to give you kudos for the creativity and grants and encourage us to look to see, are there any other places that we may be able to get a grant for and then put that money back into the general fund to be purposed. Hopefully you can find, tens of millions in grants that will help close this gap. So we're throwing that into the universe. You did mention briefly, I saw that the utilities function went up like 40-something percent. What is driving that huge increase?
So we had a really great presentation from our facilities team kind of talking us through that. Some of it is just settling up delinquent payments or payments so some of that was additional cost in the current year to catch us up. And a lot of it is just rate increases or the fact that we are doing so many additional buildings or each of those buildings. It was explained to me during ESSER when we were putting in like all of the different fans and different HVAC systems and
took
all
up
that kind of stuff.
electrical
ESSER
costs.
funds were being used to buy a lot of infrastructure that, that now we are seeing the utilities cost having to support. So
Yeah, I
some
guess you have to pay
spillover
for
in
the
that.
electricity to run all that stuff, huh?
Yeah, but one thing, the reason that we feel confident that we can work through a reduction of that ask is I've also asked for us to think about how we can streamline, how we can get leaner, how we can be more creative with making some of those reductions.
Do you want to add something,
Okay.
Mr. Hoskins?
Mr.
I
Hopkins is
can tell
lurking.
he's-
Yes. Lisa's explanation is right on point. See, I've been talking to a lot of our metro, my counterparts across the metro. Everybody's seen their utility cost, especially during COVID, increase dramatically because of the way we were running the systems in order to flush out as much of the, to keep fresh air in the buildings. So we are strategizing now, as is the rest of the metro districts in their operational areas, on just how much, now that we're in a different place with respect to COVID, how we can kind of update the way that we're running our HVAC system. So more to come on that.
And I might be a little out of line for this, but, possibly turning off the lights might help too.
Well, that,
Yeah, I'm not kidding. I just see all the lights on in some of the schools at all times. I don't know if that's a safety thing, but that might help.
yeah, that,
Just cut the lights on.
absolutely, that in fact will help. But, I think even at home, if you've been monitoring your utility bills, at least mine, have increased, pretty significantly over the, between 2019 and 2024.
Okay, and my last question, and I promise I'll be done for now, is in regards to revenue. I know that there have been some recent legislation passed around homestead exemptions. Are those assumptions included in revenue in terms of how those homestead exemptions may impact our tax digest?
They are not. So at least some of the exemptions, I think, do have to go to referendum. And so I'm not sure that those would be on the FY 2024 tax bills, which fund our FY 2025 budget. It would lag a year. So these assumptions don't include it, but we are certainly running all the cost analysis to see how those could impact out years.
So there is a way that we can estimate how that may possibly impact us?
Oh, yes.
Okay, excellent. Okay, I'm done for now. Thank you.
Great questions. Jessica?
Yes, so I noticed that we were using ESSER funds for summer school, and we're, recommending a $7 million cuts in our summer school requesting and revisiting AVA. Can you just share some more information around the thinking behind those pieces? Because I know from families we're hearing some of the challenges with.
So I will say that part of this slide is cleanup. So just like the cuts to $12 million in benefits that you see here, we're not cutting people's benefits. We're cleaning up the overstatement of some of the cost. And so what we're seeing with the summer school is right now, it has been previously funded with federal funding, but we have it also being requested in the general fund. And so we have it twice. So we're still working to analyze where the duplication of that is, what is a real ask, where it can be funded. And so this might not be a full $7 million. It is what I've asked my team to go back and ask questions about and deep dive and make sure we're not budgeting for it twice. Just trying to identify those redundancies where when we're looking through, we can kind of easily spot like, well, that 4.5 looks just like that 4.5. And we can go dive in a little bit more and ask some questions.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
So-
No, off the heels of last month's presentation, we're not coming back to cut the program.
And then I did want to, I guess Mr. Hoskins was talking a little bit about kind of some of the facilities pieces, and I know that as a board, we have some pretty big decisions coming up around our facilities master planning and some of the properties that we are potentially I'm looking to sell. Has any of that been factored into additional kind of revenues or opportunities to reduce some of the gaps that we have?
It hasn't at this point. Those sorts of strategies is exactly what we're going to be talking about next week. I will say that a strategy that we've already talked about is to set aside a separate fund to be able to track money that's coming in from like facility rentals of those properties and start tracking the cost separately so that we're seeing the utilities cost for our buildings that aren't currently being utilized for educational purposes, any revenue coming in for those offsetting that cost. So it's not in the mix of all of our other allocations, and hopefully at some point having that be an income strategy for the district. But for right now, those are just ideas that we're playing with to try to maximize the funding.
Thank you.
Great questions. Ken, do you have any?
Thank you, Dr. Bracken. A lot of work to be done, but it sounds like a lot of work's happened. Look, from where we sit, it's not our job to come sit with you and write the budget. Obviously, you should turn off the lights. That's the one exception. Please turn off the lights when you leave the room. That's just write that down.
I have been known to walk my floor
thank you.
turning off lights, and then I hear a hey.
Beyond that, it sounds like there's three strategies that because budgets are strategic documents, right? There's three strategies that we've between you and Ms. Lawson that we've heard outlined. Highest compensation in the region. We invest in small schools and lots of staff, and we have a high-touch central office that we want to provide that support. It sounds like those are the three that have been as I've unearthed here. There's probably more, but as you have these conversations in this senior cabinet room, and you got to land this plane, these are the questions that I'm going to ask are which of these strategies are directly tied to organizational goals, which are going to directly get our numbers off of 20% of our low-income kids reading at grade level. What's going to get us where we need to go? Because we're not there right now. And it's not because we don't have the resources, right? We're 30% higher than the rest of the region, and that's DeKalb. That's the number two. We're almost twice as much as Fulton and Gwinnett. So the question I'm going to ask is, how are the strategies that you're going to cut? Because we say no to some stuff so we can say yes to other stuff. What are we saying no to so we can say yes to so we can achieve our organizational goals? And I don't believe it's coming from fund balance. I think 15%. I would be curious. I would be curious is a nice. You'd get a lot of questions that we need to go into fund balance more. I think that we got to draw the line there and say, look, at some point we have the dollars. What are we going to say no to so we can say yes to? And to me, it's the organizational priorities. And I know this presentation wasn't about organizational priorities because there was no data in terms of student achievement in here. And I understand that there's a different time for that. But those two planes have to land at the same time. And so when you guys get in that room, please come back with these. We're saying no to this stuff and we're saying yes to this stuff because we think it's going to improve our organizational outcomes.
Thank you, Dr. Zaff. I think we're all on the same page up here, and then going back to our goals. Like, we do have our goals that we put in place. So when we're talking about, or what you all be talking about, what are we going to say no to? And then what are we saying yes to? How does that align with our goals? So how are we going to improve outcomes related to those goals? And we know we have some work to do around those goals as well, but that's going to help us push in more to do that work better too. So thank you for framing this conversation today. Thank you for this, level of transparency to the public too. I will definitely get your question. I'm not closing out, just pointing out things that are so helpful for us as a board because, yes, we vote on this budget. It's one of our biggest levers to improve student outcomes. And I appreciate all my colleagues being on today too because, yes, the commission's work is important, but the whole board needs to be involved and be knowledgeable of this information. So with the timeline we have right now and you all going back, what can we expect between now and April in terms of updates, you think?
Sure. So we'll come back to the legislative update. I'll move us to next steps of the budget process. So in April, I do recommend that we have an extended meeting, and I think it's worth us planning now for that. We'll cover a lot of different topics. So at that April meeting is when we do talk about all the other than general fund funding sources, so nutrition, This year, I imagine we'll have a lot to present with the nutrition plan. SPLOST will present, federal programs will present, so we'll have all those conversations on top of what we hope is the first time we're really talking about a balanced budget for the general fund. Because in May, just a couple of weeks after that April Budget Commission, we'll bring you a budget for tentative adoption to the board meeting. And so our work, the administration's work, is to balance that budget with hopefully one or two scenarios. So this is one way to budget to balance it. This is another way, and we can bring those to you. So we'll bring either one or two opportunities for how we would go about balancing that budget in April. And we'll bring the trade-offs. So that is part of the conversation that even the administration is very aware that we have to talk about. So it could be a reduction of services if we're talking about streamlining and cutting some of the cost of services to schools. Then we have to set some expectations of what we're not going to be able to do in the same way as we have. So we want to have that conversation as well. And so all of that will happen in April in order to get that plane landed in May and, fully taxied in by June.
Thank you for that update. I know Retta has some questions, but just putting it out to my colleagues, I will work with CFO Bracken to make sure people have that information as far in advance of the meeting as possible so they can really prepare, because we need to come to that meeting very prepared.
I just have one question around TRS.
Yes.
That number, of course, is a big number. Are we expecting in the near future for that number to decrease?
So this number is a bit inflated. We do know that the rates increased from 19.98 to 20.8. So there was an increase in the rates, and we're applying it to a much higher percentage. So TRS is a percentage of salary. So when we do $60 million of new salary, that rate is applied to that increase. However, this is higher than it probably should be. So that's why we are digging in to try to find some reductions in that TRS rate. Between TRS and the state health benefits, we anticipate that we'll be able to find $12 million.
I may be having a memory lapse. There was something that we were paying back.
That's the pension.
Okay.
Yes, so on this slide, you can see we're doing, at the very bottom, we're doing our annual 3% scaling. So every year we add 3% to fund our obligation to the city's pension and our employees that aren't eligible for TRS. And so that amount this year is $65.73 million. We'll continue to make that contribution until 2027, at which point we will be 100% funded, which is amazing. And we'll see about $75 million return to APS at that time.
I tried to put it back for you, but it was too soon.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you so much,
Of
CFO
course.
Bracken. We really appreciate it.
Of course, and so now I will hand off to Erica Long to give us a legislative update, and then we can wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bracken, Dr. Battle, Budget Commission Chair, Ms. Howard, board members, thank you so much for your time this afternoon as we discuss a brief legislative update where we touch on those specific issues that are relevant to financial matters handled by the legislature. The best part of my update is that today is legislative day 38 of 40. That means that constitutionally, they only have 2 more days to do work that impact our bottom line. Let's start with a discussion of a few pieces of homestead exemption legislation. Homestead exemption has been a significant topic across the Capitol during this session, both from the statewide perspective and from the local perspective. Statewide, there is a tension between the House and the Senate over whether and how to implement a statewide floating homestead exemption that would provide a 3% cap on how home assessments are increased from year to year. The Senate wanted to do something that was mandatory across the state. The House version of the bill would provide opt-out provisions for counties to opt out of this type of exemption. And they are still negotiating which of these bills will ultimately make it into law. There's a constitutional amendment companion to whatever method they choose. The opt-out provision, of course, has some attractive features. The fact that a locality, a county, could opt out of this homestead exemption. But this would have to be a vote by your county commission, by a county commission that's up for election or re-election. So we can imagine the political complexities of that. There's been quite a bit of discussion across the Capitol about the ramifications of this statewide 3% cap. Legislators have heard from school districts, from the Metro Atlanta area, from this district, from other parts of the state, of how such a cap would impact our bottom line. But of course, we are facing a November election, we're facing legislative primaries, and legislators, even on a bipartisan basis, feel a need to be sensitive to their homeowners. They've heard from their voters that things are getting too expensive for them, and they are determined to take a step on a statewide level that will provide some relief to homeowners. We're watching this closely. It's being negotiated at the very highest levels, whether we're looking at a mandatory or an opt-out, but it's very, very likely that some form of a statewide 3% cap will pass. We're also looking at two pieces of local legislation. The first one is a little bit easier. SB 439 was sponsored by your former colleague, Senator Jason Estevez. It provides a homestead exemption from APS school taxes for senior citizens age 65 or older with an income less than $100,000. There is a $10 million annual cap on that exemption. So once folks apply, once they go down to Fulton and DeKalb County and apply for this homestead exemption, we're only obligated, there's not gonna be any more than $10 million in savings made available to those senior citizens. It is subject to referendum, to voter referendum in November, but the bill itself has passed both the Senate and the House and is waiting on the governor's signature. We're comfortable with this bill. Yes, it will have an impact on us financially, but the fact that there is predictability with that $10 million cap, that there is a defined universe of people to whom it's available, we at least, Dr. Bracken can at least make some plans with those numbers in mind. HB 1481 is a little bit more complex. This is a local bill that was sponsored by State Representative Hart Hannon. She and I have worked closely on this bill since early in the session. She came to us wanting to do something to provide some relief to her homeowners, and she needed to narrow down exactly what classes, what categories of Atlantans would be eligible for this relief. We were hoping to also have an annual cap on this bill, to also put a ceiling that we could predict from year to year. But in talking with legislative counsel at the Capitol, just because of the way this exemption would be structured, an annual cap is not possible. So Rep. Cannon decided to change her focus and to look instead at neighborhoods and to think about those zip codes in Atlanta that have been most impacted by gentrification and the rise in prices. Her bill identifies several zip codes where we all know that there has been this type of impact on homeowners, and the idea is to protect those legacy residents with a homestead exemption. There are challenges to the bill. It's a local bill. It has passed the House. Rep. Cannon did not include a sunset date on it. It's over on the Senate side right now as we speak. We have a senator who's working to amend the bill to add a sunset date so that at least at some predefined point in time, probably around 10 years from now, we'll be able to sunset this exemption. And the thought is that our neighborhoods are changing so rapidly here in the city of Atlanta. Protection that we're providing to some legacy homeowners in zip code 30314 right now may not even be as necessary some years down the road. There are complications to amending a local bill after it's passed one session. They would have to amend it in the Senate, and then the House would have to do and agree to that new version of the bill. And we are running pretty close to the end of the session. Legislative Day 39 is Tuesday, sine die is Thursday. But we have been in close contact with Rep. Cannon and with other legislators just to make our concerns known about how the bill currently stands. Any questions from?
Yes. Loretta, I'll let you go, and then I have some.
So I have some questions around HB 1481. So how would this homestead exemption differ from the homestead exemption that already exists? Is it going to go on top of that? It'll be like what?
So they don't layer, and that question that you raised, that topic has been discussed throughout the Capitol because we're looking at so many homestead exemptions, statewide and local. They don't layer. And in conversations with legislators, I think sometimes they feel a tension between accomplishing something, providing some relief to their stakeholders, to their constituents, but the practicalities of how you administer these very homestead exemptions are extremely technical. It's really complicated, but no, they don't stack on top of each other.
So yeah, that's confusing because there's already a homestead exemption that you can claim regardless of what zip code you live in. And so now to say that there's a zip code that you can have a homestead exemption, my curiosity is how is that different? Is it a larger exemption? Like, so what does that mean?
As a practical matter, I have not seen for myself what that difference truly is. I think that your instincts are correct. I do not know that there is practically a big difference between whether you go down to Fulton County and grab the general exemption or ask for this new zip code-based exemption.
Okay, and so the other thing that is on my mind, it just slipped my mind, oh shoot. Well, that helps to jog my memory. So there are programs that have been put into place, I know specifically in a couple of these zip codes that don't give you a homestead exemption, but they pay the difference in your taxes. So have there been conversations around that where those who benefit from the taxing of those properties don't lose on that income, but the property owner does get the relief? So not trying to do the job, but are there any conversations about adding to those funds or creating additional funds that expand to these zip codes in terms of bridging that gap?
Yes, I am not aware of those conversations. I think that we should keep in mind the political dynamics at play at the Capitol. Politically, it's more popular to offer relief to homeowners, to taxpayers, for some people, than to say, provide a grant or a service to certain distressed areas for homeowners. I think the idea that you pose makes perfect sense as a practical matter. Let's support those organizations that are out there doing this work. But in terms of the political gamesmanship that happens there at the Capitol, it's a little bit easier many times, especially working across the aisle, to get something done where you're saying that you're protecting homeowners directly.
That's frustrating. Politics is for the birds. Curious, these zip codes, and this may be something that we could talk about later, how does that, are the representatives that represent those districts, those zip codes, aligned with this as well?
Yes, so the 1481 has passed on the House side as a local bill. That means that it had to get it didn't have to go through the entire House voting on it. It went through a signature process with our City of Atlanta delegation. So those Atlanta representatives signed off on the bill. They indicated their support. I know that Representative Cannon collaborated with some of her colleagues to make sure that she was covering the areas that were most appropriate to cover. And then that similar signature process will have to happen on the Senate side with our Atlanta Senate delegation.
Well, I would like for us to ask them to put their money where their mouth is and fund the difference in taxes.
Thank you.
And I'll just thank Senator Estevez for the work he did on his bill and making sure it's targeted to senior citizens, 65 or older, whose income is less than 100,000, with a $10 million cap, and all the thoughtfulness that went into that to provide appropriate tax relief, so we have diversity in our city, that we've got to work to ensure continues. But this really makes sense, and this has been a long-standing effort.
Yeah.
And appreciate former Senator Jen Jordan's work on it as well.
That's right, yeah.
So,
Back
yeah,
to
just
you.
want to call out to, that is what and he reached out to all of us, so we really appreciate that. I know we need to move on to any questions right here. We have the second part of legislative, there's another question, I'm sorry. Board Member Briscoe Brown.
Yes, just a quick question about about Park Cannon's legislation. How does the Beltline, how does this affect the Beltline TAD and the payments that are being made under that? Is there any correlation there?
General Counsel Gupta, is there a direct impact that we can see on the Beltline TAD payments as?
And I guess I'm looking for whether there will be less or more impact on us because some of these properties would be anticipated to be in the Beltline TAD, and so quite honestly, they may take the hit for that rather than us.
So I would have to look into that a little bit further. We do have this overarching TAD IGA, which provides for pilot payments to APS out of that Beltline TAD, and I would just need to crosswalk the proposed legislation with that TAD, IGA rather.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right. I think we're ready for the next half.
Vouchers, they pass. A general voucher bill, $6,500 to almost any student who would wish to take that to a private school. No accountability for the private schools. This would be available even to students who are just entering kindergarten for the first time. So there's no restriction on actually attending that lowest performing school before making the switch to the private. There were a few other unrelated measures that were thrown into the bill, I think, to make it more palatable to certain legislators. Some of those things were going to happen anyway through the budget process. But it passed the House this year. The Senate agreed to the House changes, and it is sitting on the governor's desk and will probably be signed any minute now.
I want to thank all our local representatives who I know worked really hard to address this, which it is very difficult. But thankful we have the resources we have, and we've got to make sure we use them extremely wisely to best serve students, because this is a reality. Jessica, question?
Yeah, thank you. I guess if you wouldn't mind just sharing the impact for like the public schools for some of our traditional schools. So I know it's a $6,500 voucher, but because we know the money follows the student, what is that equivalent of like per student that the district would be losing should families decide to exercise this choice?
Dr. Bracken, we'll crunch those numbers, particularly with respect to the state's identification of the eligible schools. There was some talk of caps, restrictions put in terms of how many families can take advantage. So we can get back to you with more specific numbers.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much for the legislative update and all your good work at the state capitol. Sorry. Shivi has a question.
Yes, thank you so much, Erica, for updating us on all of these things. I think we all have our concerns about the voucher bill and what the impacts of it may be. One of my big concerns, personally, I just want to put on the record, is that historically in other states who have passed voucher bills, 87% of the families who have been awarded these vouchers are families who had already been enrolled into private schools. And so the notion that it would be granting access to those who previously did not have access is really a farce. it becomes just a reallocation strategy of funds from some of our families more in need to families who already have the privilege to be able to afford $30,000 tuitions to private schools. I did not see an update on SB 351, which is the Protecting Georgia's Children on Social Media Act of 2024, also referred to as the cyberbullying bill. I have some very deep concerns about this bill, and I feel that there's not been enough visibility or voice to the potential dangers of this bill. There's a provision in SB 351 that allows the state to withhold state funding from a district should the district not be in compliance with all of the things that it is asking for. It also creates the opportunity to punish teachers and students for using VPNs while on a school's Wi-Fi. And for the record, I'm having to use a VPN right now to be able to access Zoom to be in community with you all right now. And the act that I'm doing right now would be punishable under this new law. And so I just wanted to know where we were with that. You know, is it something that's going to be signed into law? And whether or not we're raising enough concern with the potential dangers of losing state funding if we fall out of compliance with this bill.
Thank you. I appreciate that question. 351 in its current form doesn't have as much of a direct fiscal impact. So I didn't include it for the purpose of today's meeting, but your concern is absolutely correct with respect to the threat school district. And I will update you all on how it's going now. There are changes that are being made even within this week. There's a hope that the final form of the bill will be more similar to some of the divisive concepts legislation, where it just gets down to a mandate that districts pass a policy and pass a policy that's a little more administrable than what's being discussed right now. But those concerns that you've raised have been raised with legislators, and they are working on it. I will say there is some political headwind behind the bill, simply because you're hitting on students and social media, and the idea of protecting students is a popular one. It will pass in some form, but we're hopeful that some of the more charged political parts of it will be lessened, and that it becomes more of a policy process legislation.
Are we working actively to, and at this point it's probably already baked in, but to remove the provision that would allow them to withhold state funding from our district? Because again, all of these bills, the voucher bill, this bill, and many other bills, the true crux of them is about defunding public education.
Yes.
And this bill has devices to do exactly that.
Yeah, no, that's the common thread that runs through all of these. Nothing legislative is baked in until midnight next Thursday. So there's still 2 committee work days coming up, and there's still 2 more legislative days. The organization PAID, Professional Association of Georgia Educators, has worked closely with school districts and with legislators, particularly around that funding threat question. And I'll reach out to them and get the latest update on what's happening. But I was just on a call with some folks a couple of days ago, and that is an item that is alarming for school districts across the state.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shivi, for those questions. Any others? Oh, Retta?
So how often does the Atlanta delegation meet? And at one point, we used to be invited to those meetings. Are we still invited to those meetings?
This session, they met within the Fulton County delegation. They didn't do separate City of Atlanta, and I don't know why that change was made. Many of their meetings were via Zoom, and they only met on the Fridays that they were in session. But yeah, for whatever reason, they folded themselves into the larger Fulton County delegation. And they did not have like as many of the formal presentations as they had in the past. We did during this session participate in a luncheon with the Georgia Education Coalition, where several of our delegation members were there. We brought our student advisory councils to the Capitol for crossover day. They had several conversations with legislators and education committees and in the Atlanta delegation. But yes, the Atlanta delegation did not have that formal separate meeting that they previously have had in other years.
I feel like that was a powerful, impactful, and effective and an efficient way for us to
Yeah.
communicate in person our priorities and to advocate on behalf of our school system and how the things that they do impact us that they may not, or they may or may not know exactly. So I would love, I mean, if our opinion matters, to recommend that we pick that back up again.
Yeah, I never heard why the change was made, but it was odd to me too. Fulton County issues are obviously different from Atlanta issues and different from the CAB.
Okay, thank you. I just thought I might have missed the email.
No.
Thank you. And if there are no more questions about the legislative update, let's move on to next steps for the budget process, please. Thank you so much, Erica.
Sure. I'll just do last two items around that. There was a question about, do we know how much that 3% cap would be for us? It's around 35 to 45 million in the first year, and again, that grows exponentially. So once it's capped at that 3%, the next year you're foregoing 2 years worth of growth. The next year you're foregoing 3 years worth of growth. And so when we're seeing 10% increases, that 35% will grow into 100 million very within a couple of years. The second thing is, because we got the question before coming into this meeting, local legislation does impact our state QBE funding. And so we do take a double hit on any local legislation. We forego the collection of the local revenue for the state QBE calculation of our 5 mil share. They include it. So we also see it reduced from our QBE state funding. So I just wanted to lift that up as well. Okay, so with that, I did mention that in the appendix, we have the breakout of the funds we're going to be talking about next month. So this is your homework. You can read up and kind of think about what the different funding sources will be, and we'll bring the recommended budget allocations for each of those next month. I do recommend that we work together to find a little bit more time for that conversation in April, but the bulk of the conversation will be those two items that we've already discussed. And so with that, I will wrap us up unless there's any more questions.
I think that's it. Thank you so much. And I'm thinking work session. We'll find a way to have more time. Public comment. Marshall, nothing? Thank you, everyone, for being here and tuning in. All right, then. Well, thank you, everybody, for your participation in today's Budget Commission meeting. We appreciate you very much. And with that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All right, we're adjourned. Thank you, guys. Please call the roll.
Representing Educational District 1, Ms. Katie Howard.
Present.
Representing Educational District 2, Ms. Loretta Balden.
Present.
I do also want to acknowledge that we have Brian Hawkins, Earl Fagan, Roland Edwards, and Shelby Nelson, our community advisors who are all present. And I also want to acknowledge our superintendent, Dr. Battle, and I know that our general counsel will be here sooner than, okay. And then I also want to acknowledge our executive director of internal audit. With that being said, we do have a quorum for the meeting. As we move forward, can we get an approval of the agenda?
Motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
All in
Aye.
favor? Aye. Done. And then the minutes from the last meeting.
I move that we approve the minutes.
And then, Howard, are you seconding that?
Actually, I'm going to, our last meeting was December 14th, so we're approving the minutes from that meeting. You made a motion, I second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, and now we'll move into the election of committee chair, who would then move us further along in this meeting. Is there a nomination for chair?
I have been chair, and now I'm the chair of the Budget Commission. So I nominate Retta Balden to be chair of the Audit Committee.
That gives me two. I guess I'll second it.
So there's been a nomination. Are we closing on said name? Is there a motion to close on said name?
I make a motion to
Second.
close on, to nominate Retta Balden as chair of the Audit Committee.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Chair Balden, you didn't seem too excited.
I'm so
Motion
excited.
passes unanimously. Chair Balden, I'll now turn it over to you to turn it over to Connie.
I actually am really excited because this is the best committee in the district to work on because we have the most amazing staff helping us out, as well as community advisors bringing the expertise. So it is my honor and pleasure to accept the role. Thank you. So Connie, you got some stuff for us to talk about?
Just a little bit.
Okay.
So thank you, Chair Baldwin. This afternoon, we plan to present the annual comprehensive financial report for year-end June 30, 2023. We'll follow that by a presentation of our student services audit by our plant and mooring partners. So at this time, I'm going to invite Doug Moses, who's a partner with Malden & Jenkins, to the podium, and he will present our annual financial statements.
You already know. All right, thanks for having me here today to present the audit results. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at the ACFR in detail. I know it's a big report, as well as the SPLOS performance audit, and then the ADA, or Auditor's Discussion and Analysis, is what I'll be presenting from today. But if you have any questions as I'm going through, you can stop and ask, or we can address those questions at the end. Right. Am I in control? Okay, thanks. All right. Go to the next slide. So just a quick update about Malden & Jenkins. We've been around for over 100 years. We've audited over 650 governments in the Southeast. 150 of those governments received the GFOA Award in Excellence in Financial Reporting, and APS is amongst that number. We actually have 14 offices in 6 states, and the latest edition was in Raleigh, North Carolina. And again, I was the partner responsible for the overall audit engagement with over almost 25 years of experience. This year I had a different partner to do the quality control review, Trey Scott. He's the partner in charge of our Savannah office, and he has about probably 17 years of experience, if not more. And then, of course, we had other staff, managers and seniors and staff, associates on the audit engagement as well. As far as the financial statements, the responsibility for the financial statements is management responsibility. Our responsibility is to give an opinion that the financial statements are materially correct. We've issued an unmodified opinion, which is a clean opinion, is what you would hope to get from the external audit. Go to the next slide. As far as the report on the 2023 federal award programs or the single audit report, again, that's included within your ACFR towards the back of the ACFR report. We did audit 2 programs, the elementary, secondary school relief fund, as well as the COVID emergency connectivity fund. Those 2 programs amounted to about 56% or $94 million of the total federal expenditures as of June 30, 2023 of $169 million. And we've issued clean opinions on those programs, though there are no exceptions as it relates to the compliance requirements for those 2 programs. As far as the SPLOS performance audit, we did look at, your Fulton SPLOS and your DeKalb SPLOS programs. We looked at 85 expenditures, 60 from your Fulton SPLOS and 25 from DeKalb SPLOS programs, and all were expended on allowable costs in accordance with the SPLOS referendums for each of those programs. We did look at 9 SPLOS contracts that were entered into during fiscal year 2023, and again, no issues there, proper board approval, proper procurement approval, things of that nature. There are no exceptions. Next. As far as the compliance report, again, this is sometimes referred to as the Yellow Book report or GAS report, the Government Auditing Standards report. And again, this is a report on your internal controls. We're not required to provide an opinion on those internal controls, but an understanding of the controls in place. We didn't have any findings that were on a financial statement level that were cited within this report as well. And then down below is some audit procedures that we perform. This is just a snippet of that, not all inclusive, but we confirm receivables, cash, investments, and other audit elements of the audit. We also vouch substantiated additions of capital assets, balances of construction in progress, and then we also vouch significant retainage payables or contracts payables. And then we also perform a search of unreported liabilities at year end, make sure you have proper cutoff as it relates to those payables as reported at June 30. As far as significant accounting policies, the district did implement a new accounting policy as it relates to GASB 96, which deals with the accounting and reporting of subscription-based IT arrangements. And here you recognize a subita asset or a liability if it's deemed to be significant or material, if those terms exceed a one-year term. And so the district did implement a policy that addresses this new standard. And it's very similar to GASB 87 dealing with leases. As far as our relationship with management, we receive full cooperation from management staff and others. There are no disagreements with management on accounting issues or financial reporting matters. As far as audit adjustments, there were no unrecorded or past audit adjustments, meaning that anything that came to our attention, those entries were recorded and reflected in the district general ledger, as well as in its financial statements. We did have some audit adjustments, some that were proposed by management, and then some that were proposed by us that are included in the back of this report. As far as our audit independence, as it relates to the school system and its reporting, financial reporting process, we were independent in accordance with AICPA professional standards. There were no fees paid to Martin Jenkins for any type of management advisory services that would have impacted our independence as your external auditor. All right, next slide kind of looks at a couple of financial trends over the last 10 years. This first one is looking at your net position or equity and change in net position, net income or loss over the last 10 years for your governmental activities. Again, this is taking all of your fund balances or your trial balances on a full accrual basis of accounting. You're reflecting capital assets, long-term debt, things of that nature. And so, of course, you know, the obvious huge decline in your net position in 2014, which was expected. This is when governments had to recognize GASB 68, dealing with the accounting and reporting of your pension. You all have 2 pension plans, your local plan that with the city of Atlanta, as well as the PRS. And so that brought your net position down from $1.4 billion in 2014 down to $498 million in 2015. Then you can see it started increasing, and then of course we had to recognize GASB 75, dealing with the accounting and reporting of other post-employment benefits that you participate with Department of Community Health. And so you can see that brought your net position down from 548 million in 2016 down to 122 million in 2017. And then from there was no other major GASB standard that impacted government's net position like those two did. And so you can see your net position continue to increase since then, hitting 475 million in 2021, 742 million in 2022, and 835 million in 2023. So your net position increased $93 million this year that we audited, 2023. Now that's not as a big of an increase compared to 2022, which was about 266 million. And the reason for that was that the net pension liabilities increased significantly from 2022 to 2023, about 649 million, then offset by increases in your net in your revenue for that year. So that's why your change in net position was not as big as it was in 2022. When you look at the breakdown of your net position, and you had about $1.3 billion invested in capital assets, net of related debt. You had about 262 million restricted for capital projects and state and local programs. And then you had a deficit, unrestricted net position amount of about 766 million. And then that's kind of expected for a lot of governments, especially school districts. You having to recognize your OPEB and pension liabilities. However, that deficit in unrestricted net position did improve over 2022. 2022, you had about an $815 million deficit unrestricted net position. This year is down to 7. Right? Next slide. Of course, your general fund is your main operating fund of the district. Your general fund balance did increase by $35 million over 2022, going from 261 million to 296 million as of 2023. A good rule of thumb for June 30 governments is to have 2 to 3 months reserve, or anywhere from 17 to 25%. You can see you all have exceeded that over the last several years. 29% in 2022, 30% in 2023, and those numbers reflect that you all did not have to get a tax anticipation note after year end to get you through those subsequent months until your property tax. So good job in protecting your fund balance and having a strong fund balance. And so again, these are good numbers for the district, and you continue to improve. So hats off for great job done. All right, so we didn't have any findings that were deemed to be material weaknesses or significant deficiencies. Management worked very hard to make sure that the records are in great shape to be audited. So again, hats off to your finance and accounting team, Lisa, Tanisha, Jerry, and all the staff doing a great job. We did have 2 management points or recommendations for improvement. This first one deals with P cards, and this has kind of been a repeat management point. We looked at a total of 60 P card transactions during fiscal year 2023, and 39 of the 60 did not have that second layer of approval. And so that is a high exception rate, just looking at 60 transactions and noting that 39 of them did not have that second level of approval. So we want to make sure that all of your P card transactions are being properly approved at the initial level as well as secondary level. And then we noticed 5 of the 60 did not have any approval at all. And so if you continue to have like repeat offenders, you may look to remove them as authorized P card users. Next slide. During our testing of capital assets and our discussions with management, we noted that there was some capital asset activity from the previous year that had the wrong in-service date, which resulted in depreciation being not calculated in the right period. And so that resulted in a $963,000 decrease in construction in progress and about a $3.7 million increase in depreciation for your equipment. The net effect of this was not deemed to be material at the government-wide level, and so we passed on restating beginning balances, and so the correction was made during the fiscal year 2023 activity. And so we just recommend management continues to look at that the in-service dates on the assets that are being recorded to make sure that the depreciation is being calculated in the proper period. Next slide, we continue to have our government advisory services that are performed for a lot of governments, where governments can have an operational assessment done. And so you can see the various core offerings that are offered by our governmental practice. Next slide. And then also we have a IT cybersecurity practice as well. I tell you, in light of some of the cyber attacks that we hear about that's affecting companies and governments across the nation, might be a good idea, if you all haven't had one done in recent years, consider having an IT cybersecurity audit done. One of your neighboring school districts actually just put out an RFP to have such an audit done, and so it's something to consider if y'all haven't had one done in recent years. GASB continues to be busy with new GASB pronouncements. Nothing significant like the last two dealing with 96 and 87, but these are some new ones that will be affecting your current fiscal year that you're in and subsequent fiscal years. We've talked with management about these. This won't be any major impacts on your financial statement balances, but it's going to improve your footnote disclosures to your financial statement. Next slide. One more. All right, we continue to offer free continuing education classes for our clients, again, free of charge. These have been done virtually over the last several years since the pandemic. We actually just had one yesterday, and a repeat of that would be taught on Monday, and your staff have participated in those courses, and I believe you all have hosted, prior to the pandemic, you all had hosted one of those classes here at your facilities years ago as well. But again, you can see the various topics that are being taught, and so if you want to be invited to any of these classes, just let me know, and we'll get you on that invite list. But that kind of concludes my presentation. Again, it was an honor and pleasure to provide auditing services to the school districts, and you continue to be a great client. So again, hats off to everyone for doing a great job.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I see Pierre is checking online. Katie, do you have any? So I have one question.
Yes, ma'am.
In regards to P cards, so we've seen it look a lot worse. So that's awesome. But I have a question in regards to processes and protocols. How are those who have P cards trained? And then tell me about that secondary approval and what we can do moving forward to ensure that everyone knows the proper approvals that are necessary. But I do want to highlight that we don't see, and I don't know if maybe you just weren't measuring for this, but we didn't see split charges. So there are some things that we're not seeing that we have seen in the past. And so this does look like an improvement from what we've seen, but this wasn't a P card only audit. So that's kind of two questions, one for Connie and one for Dr. Bracken.
Well, I guess before Lisa comes up, our team, after discussions last year, we decided to hold off on continuing with any P card audits until some more training was done and in reaction to some of the audit findings that Malden and Jenkins have. So we haven't looked at it probably in about a year and a half.
So this scope would not have included that piece of?
We haven't looked at it.
Okay.
Yes, I will add that our P-card team is fully staffed now, and we do have a lot of practices in place that we've implemented since the last time that Connie's team did audit that area. And so we're still looking for things like split charges, for inappropriate spend. We're sending those letters to to the P card owners and also management, if we see anything like that, and are watching it from that perspective. I will say on the signatures, we're noodling an idea there. What we're seeing a lot is, just like for me, if I use my P card, the supervisor to sign off is Dr. Battle, and I don't want to bring her my paper purchases, right? And so we see the same thing for principals who might be using their P cards in a school and then going to Associate Soups to do the sign off on that. So we're looking at an idea where it is just the bookkeepers in the schools that have access to the P cards, and the principal is the sign off on that. So my special projects coordinator has the P card. I don't use a P card, and then I am authorizing her purchases so that we can have that two-way approval where the person at the top who would be doing the approval has the P card in their name. There isn't that second line of approval in the building. Because the other thing is an associate signing off on a principal's P cards, they don't know what's actually being purchased either way. So we do think that that's a better way to approach it, and we're looking at that idea for implementation for next year, which we think will help with this sign-off process.
Thank you. I appreciate you looking deeper than just what's happening, but why is this happening and what can we do to be in compliance. So thank you. Pierre, were there any questions from our community members? Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Doug. Moving along, we're going to ask Matthew and Caroline to join us. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
We do
Would you
have a question.
Hold up for a moment. Doug?
Doug, don't leave yet, Doug. There is a question for you. Please return to the podium. And Earl, you have the floor. Thank you. Did we lose him? Okay, maybe it was a false alarm. We just wanted you to do another lap.
I need the exercise.
Thank you. We may have a question to follow up with you later. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, we're going to move ahead with the presentation for our student services audit. So Matthew Bowden and Caroline Main with Plant Moran are going to join us at the podium.
Thank you, everybody, for giving us the opportunity today to present the results of our student services internal audit. Why don't we go ahead and move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we're going to keep this deliberately brief for you. This is a summary of the report that we previously provided to the board. Overall today, what we'll go through is just some team introductions or reintroductions of your internal audit leadership team from Plant Moran. We're going to talk about our internal audit overview, the purpose and scope of the audit, the objectives of the audit. We're going to go over themes and observations from our fieldwork procedures, and of course, summary overview of the results. Happy to address any and all questions that you may have. We may not have the answer right at the outset, but if we don't, we're happy to go back, take another look, and get you the answer that you need from. So real quick on introductions. So Troy Snyder, engagement partner, unfortunately had a conflict today. He was not able to join us in person. He is here listening in. So he's happy to be here in support of this internal audit. I'm Matt Bowden. I'm principal in our Risk and Accounting Advisory Services practice. Troy and I lead our public sector and K-12 practice in Caroline, Maine. I'll introduce you'll be hearing plenty from her in a moment. She's a senior manager in our practice and was the fieldwork lead for this internal. Before we go into specific results, I do want to thank everybody that you know, participated in this internal audit. It's not easy to be subject to an internal audit. It can be a little intimidating for folks, but we were met with acceptance and support of everybody with whom we spoke, and we got the sense that it's a very open and there's a commitment to getting better and commitment to improvement. So, with all that said, I'm going to hand it to Caroline to take us through the specifics of the audit. Thank you.
Right, thank you. So we'll start off with just a brief overview of our internal audit objectives and scope. So the objective of our audit was to evaluate the student services function across all non-charter system schools for the 2022-2023 school year. We did take a risk-based selection of 30 schools. That included high schools, middle schools, as well as elementary schools. And our audit objectives were really focused around student attendance, student academics, and student discipline. We did look at district policy and compared that against board policy, as well as the Georgia Department of Education regulations. We also looked at training related to these areas, as well as reviewed sample documentation. Additionally, we facilitated interviews with school administration. Those interviews were with primarily principals and assistant principals, as well as attendance clerks and some others in certain cases as well. We identified internal controls throughout the process, and then lastly identified gaps and recommendations to mitigate risk, and that is captured throughout our findings that we will cover in more detail. Okay. So just to cover a few different themes we noted through the audit. The first one relates to retention of student records and documentation. So we did note that Infinite Campus is not being consistently used to document information related to student attendance and discipline. This did result in some cases where the evidence that we needed to obtain to perform our audit objectives was not able to be provided to us. Secondly, student discipline policy and practices. So first being that administrators and teachers use discretion when identifying appropriate progressive discipline interventions, supports, and responses in alignment with district policy. That sometimes did result in some judgment being applied as far as that discretion when they're determining intervention and support outcomes. And then secondly, discipline training is offered to principals, but not teachers and administrative staff. So training also did not address all key elements of the district policy. So this kind of gap in the training also potentially could lead to some judgment being applied in discipline outcomes as well. And then the third theme here relates to the student discipline support system. First item being disciplinary programs differ across schools, which may lead to inequitable discipline outcome for students. For example, some schools have in-school suspension programs while others do not. And then secondly, the number and type of support staff varies from school to school. For example, number of counselors, behavioral specialists, non-instructional aides does vary from school to school. That said, we did note, just last comment there. That said, we did note that from our interviews, the schools did not express that they had concerns over their support structure for students and staff, but we did think that that was worth noting that there are some differences there. Okay, so just to provide kind of a brief overview of our findings. In total, we had 17 findings, 3 of which were high priority, those related to discipline. 11 were moderate priority. Those did include all areas: discipline, attendance, access provisioning, and academic record keeping. And then lastly, low priority, there were 3 findings. Our presentation today really just focuses on the high and moderate priority. The additional 3 low priority items we excluded just in the interest of time, but those are found in the full report that the board has access to. Okay. And please feel free to stop me throughout if there are any questions. I'll kind of try to pause after each slide, but don't hesitate to ask questions throughout. So starting off here with our first 3 high priority findings, Like I said, these relate to discipline. The first finding relates to the completion of the optional student discipline learning plan for principals and assistant principals is not enforced. Our recommendation here is for district administration to enforce and monitor completion deadlines for the student discipline learning plan. Next, the optional student discipline training does not address all aspects, all key aspects of the student code of conduct. And we recommend that the student discipline learning plan is updated so that it includes modules that address all key aspects of the student code of conduct, specifically related to discipline. And then last high priority finding was related to student names found in behavior reports, which potentially could result in FERPA violations. For this, we recommend reinforcing expectations to comply with FERPA during student discipline related training. Really the recommendation here is for those full student names to not be included in those reports to reduce the risk of a potential violation. And then secondly, behavior administrators should review behavior referrals that already exist within Infinite Campus and remove any identifiable student information, again, to reduce the risk of any issues in the future. Okay. Moving into moderate priority findings, the first few here relate to discipline. The first one, student discipline training for teachers is inconsistent across schools. The Office of Student Discipline should develop and deliver a district-wide student discipline training program. Our next finding is related to student behavior reports not being filed promptly. We recommend that the district administration reinforces the responsibility to file student behavior referrals within 1 day in accordance with the policy. And then third here, discrepancies were identified between the student behavior reports filed and the guidance per the 2022-23 student handbook and student code of conduct. We recommend considering revising the student handbook to ensure consistency and clarity of responses to disciplinary offenses, as well as district administration should reinforce the expectation for adherence to these guidelines through training and monitoring. A couple additional moderate findings related to discipline. Notification to a parent or legal guardian of the student's behavior incident was not consistently documented in Infinite Campus. We encourage district administration to reinforce this expectation for both teachers and administrators to adhere to the notification guidelines established in the handbook. We did note that there are some automated notifications going out that may be captured elsewhere within Infinite Campus. So just working to ensure that those automated notifications as well are captured in the contact log so that there's clear, documentation that the policy was followed. Additionally, I mentioned the next one in our themes, but some schools do have in-school suspension programs while others do not, which could create some potential for inequitable discipline outcomes for students. We recommend evaluating whether additional schools within the district might benefit from an in-school suspension program, just to ensure that all students within the same grades do have appropriate disciplinary responses available. Okay. I'll pause. Any questions so far?
Are there any questions online, Pierre? Okay, Board Member Brooks?
Hi, thank you so much for doing this audit. I have a question as to whether or not there is a list of schools that do have the in-school suspension option and which schools do not, as well as any data on whether how often out-of-school suspensions are being utilized in the schools without, in comparison to the schools that have the option, and whether or not discipline is being used, like what the actual data points are on that.
Absolutely. To answer your first question, we do have a list of the schools that indicated through our interviews that they do not have an in-school suspension program. So I can certainly pull that list and provide that following this meeting. To answer your second question, I will also have to get back to you on that. Reviewing that data as far as whether the in-school suspension programs are being fully utilized, that was not part of what we reviewed in the audit, but we can certainly look into that and see if that's something that the district would be able to provide.
Thank you. Is there also any data on how that is discipline is being enforced along the lines of age, grade level, race, gender? Are we able to pull any data on that as well?
Yeah, we, part of what we did review, so the district is performing some analytics and review over trends in some of the discipline data that I imagine is what you're asking about. So we did review that. We also did perform some additional analytics on our own. Any trends that we noted are captured through our findings, so there's nothing in addition to that. But we can certainly collaborate with Connie Brown and see if there's additional data that can be provided following this meeting.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Board Member Howard?
I think my questions, actually, I'll save them for the end
Okay.
because I have them for the district. So, but I appreciate Board Member Brooks asking about data, which I know the district has, but understanding you all are finding where there are gaps and certainly recording information.
And I'm going to hold my questions
Okay.
until the end as well.
Okay, great. Okay, so moving into just a few other areas here, I just wanted to make sure we weren't getting too far in if there were questions on the discipline. So we've kind of gotten through the discipline findings so far. So moving in, a couple moderate findings related to student attendance. The first one being that evidence of attendance protocols performed for excessive unexcused absences was not consistently documented in Infinite Campus. Again, going back to the theme of lack of documentation in Infinite Campus. So our recommendations here first would be for the attendance clerk or designee to review Infinite Campus daily for students who have accumulated unexcused absences and perform the attendance protocols or escalate to the responsible staff. Second would be for the attendance clerk or designee to review Infinite Campus weekly and ensure performance of attendance protocols is documented. Second finding here relates to schools not monitoring attendance record modifications to ensure modifications are appropriate and authorized. We recommend that school personnel who do not have access to enter attendance records perform a periodic review over these modifications to ensure that they're appropriate. Okay, one finding related to access provisioning. This one is that Infinite Campus access provisioning and modification requests were not approved and/or explanations for access changes were not consistently documented in Infinite Campus or Microsoft Power Apps. In this case, the access provisioning and changes does flow through Microsoft Power Apps, so just to clarify that. And our recommendation here is that all Infinite Campus access modifications or additions should be independently approved and documented. Again, the current process would be to do so through Microsoft Power Apps. Okay, and then the last finding related to academic record keeping. Evidence of approval for grade changes was not received from schools for most samples tested. This is another process where the approval actually takes place outside of Infinite Campus. Again, the approval flows through Microsoft Power Apps, so I think that contributed to some of the issues here is that approval is outside of the system, so pulling that documentation and making sure that the changes that were made were in fact approved. There seemed to be a disconnect there. So our recommendation here would be to perform a quarterly user access review to ensure that the ability to record grade changes in Infinite Campus is limited to the Chief Accountability Officer's designee for each school. Okay, and then just a final note here on next steps. So we've been collaborating with management. You've all seen in the report the management responses. So the next steps would be for management to move forward with implementing those action plans in accordance with the deadlines that were agreed upon. And then second, internal audit is going to be performing follow-up remediation audits during the next several months and into the next school year. So that will be the next step here. Once management has implemented the recommendations, would be for internal audit to perform a follow-up audit and confirm that they have been implemented. Okay.
Now, I believe we have some more questions. Let's start with those online, and then we'll move to folks in the building. All right, Board Member Brooks, if you'll give us a different emoji if you have a new question, we'll come back to you. Board Member Howard?
Thank you for this report, and I think my questions really are more for our staff, if you all are ready. Aretta, I can hold off on asking those questions if you have some for the audit team.
I think the majority of my questions are for the staff as well. The audit team may have some input to ask, but my questions are more looking forward versus looking back. But I do want to say that we have seen, and I'm not sure exactly where, that there certainly have been some inequities in our student discipline. And this is a step forward in naming some of those challenges and then rectifying the situation. I'm going to ask this question, but if you want me to pause, then we can go back that. This is the 22-23 school year rate. Is it correct that, when did you come on board, Chelsea?
I got discipline records July 1st of this year.
Okay, so we are now currently in, I just want to highlight that we are in we have a new structure and probably some new protocols and processes that have been put into place since that was done. So please feel free to highlight that with the questions that are coming forward. So I'm going to pause, go to Board Member Howard, and then I'll come back if she doesn't ask all my questions.
Thank you, and I appreciate that as well, Retta. That this is full transparency. We know there's work to be done, but you've got to figure out what's going on first, which is another reason I love this committee.
Yes, it's the best committee ever. Look under the hood.
And then bringing in folks who have expertise in this area. Well, I know Retta and I have a lot of questions, and I know y'all are expecting them. So just looking at the disproportionality in the way discipline practices are applied. Let's start there. In school suspension versus out-of-school suspension. And we also know that schools have autonomy for good reason, but how do we support them in using that autonomy in the right way and supporting our students, also with the right staff? And then I'll pause there because you know I'm going to ask about the budget and how it all aligns.
So I'd say that's the biggest thing with in-school suspension is it requires a staff member. And the schools have the ability to choose to invest in an in-school suspension program or not, but it does usually come down to that one person is usually the difference. Some of the disproportionality we see from school to school is our training is pretty black and white. We don't really do a whole lot of norming. We need to. And if this is my third fight this school year, how many days of OSS did I get at one school versus another school? So we don't do that. We don't do that norming work that we need to do between schools. And again, I was thrilled for the opportunity to get this audit as I got this work because now I get to see everything and tear it up that we need to work on. So we will be making quite a few adjustments to our trainings next year. And again, also them being required. That's a big thing as well. But the autonomous piece comes in really in do you have OSS or not? And then what are your tier 1 structures and supportive management to support discipline in your school? We've never really written those down. This year's the first year that we have collected tier 1 behavior and attendance plans. We got most of them. This gives us a little more teeth to really lean into those for next year and understand what schools are doing at that tier 1, top of tier 2 level for both discipline and attendance. We haven't had that before until this year.
That is great to hear. And what are we seeing in terms of what is working in this space? Because we know there are huge problems with out-of-school suspension.
But we also know we need to support in school in the right way for our students. And then also, I want to know about any recommended policy changes to the board.
So a lot of the changes that we need to make right now are in the code of conduct. You'll see that in these findings. We need to better align with the state. We need clearer visuals and matrices for schools to follow. It's kind of hard to use. We could make that easier. We do have work to do in that written part, but then as well as the training part. As far as what's working, to be totally transparent, I'm still getting my hands on everything we have. So we're doing a lot of collecting of what programs we have, looking at the impacts of those programs. We do have 17 schools doing PBIS. PBIS works, we know it does. So those, just a shout out to those 17 schools, and Tara Shelton is here as well. That work works. So leaning into that, continuing to support that, I think from the top down is gonna be really important. Next year we will have more support for schools that are interested in becoming PBIS schools, but without a doubt, if you are PBIS and you support that teaching of behavior and expectations in your school, it makes a difference.
That's very helpful as well. And I'm thinking about our guardrail around equity, and then, which is extremely important, and not allowing there to be inequitable environments for our students in terms of supports. So going back to the budget as we plan 2025, like really seeing what it will require to fully support PBIS, and other things, recommendations I feel like are going to be forthcoming as you understand more what's happening within the district to support and what really needs to be done. I have some other questions as well, but I'm going to pause there because I know Retta has a lot, and we'll end up taking each other's questions.
Not necessarily a lot, but a few. So, training and monitoring, basically, I heard that, and it sounds like that is incredibly important. And I just want to make sure that our training is actually impactful and not just checking a box. So I look forward to what that training looks like versus me just sitting and have a computer voice read to me, click, 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 okay, I'm done. But something that's, like I said, is going to be impactful, engaging. The other thing that popped up a lot is documentation. And so we spend a lot of money on Infinite Campus. And so are those documentation problems because people don't know how to use the system, because there are system limitations? What is it that we're seeing? And the reason why this is so important to me is oftentimes attendance is an indicator to other issues and other problems. And if we can get to that student then, when we see that there's attendance problems before it elevates to something else, then we would be doing everyone a great service. So what is the issue with Infinite Campus?
Sure, yeah. Thank you for the question, Board Member Baldwin. It's really less about the limitations of the technology and more about, like we said, just additional and continued training, and then the monitoring and the follow-up monitoring from both the designee on the ground and those secondary designees. So it more is along the lines of, and within the plans that we implement those monitoring pieces at the school level, but then also do those quarterly checks as well to ensure that we are following our own protocols.
And I'm just going to say again how important it is that our students are actually in classes. You can't learn if you're not in the class. And if you're not in the class, that means you're somewhere else with idle hands that could be doing something else. So this is incredibly important, and please let me know if there's something else that you need from the board in terms of supporting this, or how we can elevate how important it is that folks aren't just trained, but they really do embody what it is that they get with that training.
1,000%, and we are sincerely grateful for support and continued support.
Okay. Yep, going back to Katie.
So attendance clerks, they're a huge part of that. Who has attendance clerks? Because does every school have one? I mean, and not necessarily that they need to have one, but this is an example of there's differences throughout the system.
Right, yeah, with the autonomy and flexibility, not every school has that attendance clerk function. They have a designee that acts in that capacity, but they do not all have, and that leads to then, ensuring unified understanding, because you're going to have different staff with different designations that are getting that training and acting in that capacity.
Because we know educators have a lot they're doing already, and making sure that, like Retta's saying, we put in place a training that's meaningful, but like you've got the right people doing that work. So that goes back to kind of the presentation we had today around people. So this is all really good to think about as we move forward with the 2025 budget. But yeah, hearing, you all's recommendations, like Retta said, how we can support this area. We've got to have accurate data on attendance, but of course we know what it takes to also get kids into school. That goes to social workers, that goes to support systems, and all those things we have got to fund properly with the right people. So I'm glad we're focusing in on the importance of getting accurate attendance data, as well as obviously discipline data, because it's critically important that we focus in on this area, because students can't learn to their full potential if they're not supported in school. So thank you so much. I think those are my questions, right?
Pierre, do we have any questions from Board Member Brooks or our community? I knew he would. Board Member Brooks, it's back on you.
Thank you, Board Member Bowman. I just wanted to elevate, as somebody who has to utilize Infinite Campus, how much of a challenge it could be that if you make a phone call or you send an email to a parent to then have to go into Infinite Campus and then enter in another data set on that platform as well, it's like such a duplication of work. And it does end up creating a lot of barriers for educators who are, trying to do their due diligence to reach out to a parent, but then you got to do an extra step to reach out or to document that you reached out. It is so antiquated. And then on top of that, to even keep track of student attendance for an administrator and at the, kind of macro school level, it would be so much more helpful if we had a system that had more of a dashboard that allowed you to track where attendance for students, grades for students, discipline for students, where they live in the community, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there is new technology coming online throughout the country where this is happening. And I would encourage us to start exploring what it would look like to be able to have those type of dashboards so we could be more nimble in responding to these needs.
Thank you for that perspective.
Thank you, Board Member Brooks. Just want to let you know that we are bringing that right after spring break. We're bringing to the board a request for a new attendance support system. And so again, as you asked, what can the board do? So we're looking for funding related to that system, which will do exactly what you described. Have a dashboard to be able to understand which kids, attendance, all of those things. So we're excited about bringing that forth. So we look forward to your support.
Hopefully there's money for that, Dr. Brecken.
Amen.
I have a thumbs up from Lindsay Evans back there.
That would definitely be exciting to see. And the input from Board Member Brooks is very valuable. So if we have not already, if we haven't done focus groups with those on the ground who are using these programs and experiencing these challenges, I would encourage us to talk to them firsthand about what are the challenges that lead to why some of these things aren't happening, that could help us come up with some actionable recommendations on how we can make it easier.
I think that will be the perfect kind of check when we do a check-in on how the new training go, how are the record keeping going. I think to do focus groups would be a great way for us to get that kind of round two of information.
Excellent. Are there any other questions? Katie, Board Member Howard.
Real quickly, and I know I'm getting in the weeds, but the dashboard, I'm talking about a new system, but don't we have dashboards we're working on for our schools right now? Like, how do those?
So as far as attendance work is concerned, and I see as attendance and behavior as complementary. We have great relationships, kids will be in school. So I see them as really going together. So what we currently have is we follow what our policy is and what the state looks at as average daily attendance. That's not the best way to look at attendance. We really don't capture all of our chronic absenteeism. And to Board Member Brooks' point, we don't have those by zip code. We don't have that level to be able to intervene faster and be able to get to support faster, especially in attendance. Attendance is very reactive, it's very truancy focused, and we just need to do a really big shift as a district to turn that upside down. And this, what's coming to you after spring break for the board meeting is kind of step one, so we have everything we need to get rolling, help with the rewrite the policy, and really look at attendance in that way. Discipline-wise, we do have an excellent dashboard. So on the discipline side of the work, the dashboard is really, really good. It breaks down by any way you could want to look at it. We're set there, but attendance is just a little harder. It's not just about were you there, were you not? You really have to dig deeper for attendance.
That's a real helpful explanation. Just want to make sure we're not layering on that, these two things are needed. And I have seen some of that discipline dashboard data, which is extremely helpful. And I can see a difference now than in the past. So thank you.
The attendance item is actually it's an intervention while doing no work, which is the best of interventions.
And TAPL is just the data information on whether kids are in school.
Right.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions in this area? Seeing that there are none, thank you so much to both of y'all.
Thank
or actually
you.
all 5 of y'all. Connie, I believe it's on you.
It is. Pierre, if you would pull up my presentation. No. Okay. Thank you very much. On to the next portion, the update for the Office of Internal Compliance for this quarter. In our presentation this afternoon, we will provide an update on the audit plan for school year 2024, followed by an update on the district's plan to address record retention deficiencies. Lindsay Evans, our Executive Director for Federal Programs, will also join us to provide an update on the remediation efforts related to our recent federal programs cross-monitoring assessment performed by the Georgia Department of Education. Our report out will conclude with an update on our ethics and compliance concerns since our last meeting. Since our last meeting, and you just heard this, we did complete the student services audit, our MCAAF audit, the Office of Employee Experience and Performance audit, our governance audit, and our risk assessment project are all in process and are on track to be completed within our estimated budget and timeline. Our MCAAF audits is a mouthful, but those are basically our student activity account audits at the schools. We started conducting our audits in February of this year, and to date, we've completed about 73% of our schools. That's about 43 right now. 43 of those audits have been completed, and our goal is to have all the audits completed by mid-May and ready for report out to the board, to the audit committee in June. So we plan to have a summary dashboard for the audit committee to review and some recommendations as well. For our Office of Employee Experience and Performance, that's formerly OER, our fieldwork is complete and we are in the reporting phase right now. We are currently reviewing management responses to our audit findings, and we expect that audit report to be ready and presented at our June meeting as well. For our risk assessment process, the risk assessment data is currently under review within the department, and we are working to draft the audit plan for school year 2025. The risk assessment and proposed audit plan for school year 2025 will be presented during the audit committee meeting in June. Next, we have our governance audit, which we just kicked off, so the internal preliminary planning has been started. And again, that one we expect to be completed within budget as well by our friends at Plant Moran. Federal programs was scheduled to start in January, but I'd like to delay the discussion on why that hasn't been started until after we get an update from our Federal Programs Division a little later on in this process. So we'll circle back with that. In terms of special projects, we did receive a special request from the superintendent to conduct a review of special education services, specifically concerns around the timely identification of students for special education services and procedures for engaging families in determining the special education services needed for their children. After discussions with the previous audit chair, Howard, we decided to accept this request, and we will keep the committee updated as our work progresses in that line. Next are follow-up corrective action plans. We are continuing to work with our partners, Plant Moran, to follow up and validate open corrective action plans. The goal is to determine what's outstanding and validate as many of the remediated items as possible before the end of the school year. And again, results will be presented to the audit committee in our June meeting. But that process is underway right now. I talked fast, so at this point I'm going to pause and ask if there are any questions about anything that I've mentioned thus far.
Pierre, do we have any questions online?
Okay, great. So as noted in previous audit committee meetings, a recurring theme in several of our audits relates to record retention. The committee asked the superintendent to address this concern, and today I can share the district's plan regarding the APS records retention remediation plan. I do have some comments here that I'm going to share. We're fortunate that Dr. Battle is here and a few other senior leadership members in case there are questions that you guys might have. But at this point, I'm going to read I'm going to share that schedule with you. So on the screen, that is the plan. And due to multiple audit findings resulting from a lack of internal documentation, Dr. Battle has directed APS improve its record retention practices. As a result, the district has developed the following plan. First, legal has already reviewed the current APS records retention schedule and determined it to be legally compliant with all applicable laws. Again, this is already complete. Legal will additionally confer with APS divisions to determine whether additional categories of records should be included on the retention schedule in excess of the legal requirements and update the retention schedule accordingly. This will be completed by May 31st, 2024. In the meantime, compliance with the current and legal compliant retention schedule is key. Accordingly, the following steps are being taken. First, Dr. Battle has issued a written directive to all employees requiring that all APS records be retained on an APS-operated platform, along with the contents of the retention schedule. Second, because the retention schedule is massive, the administration, with legal's guidance, is creating targeted one-pagers for the respective divisions that highlight the categories of records most relevant for those divisions. These one-pagers will be communicated to the divisions by March 29th, 2024. Additionally, legal will offer training for the divisions. Training, either remote or in person, will be completed by May 31st, 2024. Finally, APS currently has many different platforms on which documents may be saved. For instance, APS uses Infinite Campus, OneDrive, Lawson, SharePoint, Dropbox, Google Docs, and a shared drive for highly sensitive information. There's a lot of platforms. Current practices negatively impact both retention of records and retrievability of those records. As APS is exploring a new ERP system, the district has an opportunity to refine and improve its retention practices. Accordingly, in conjunction with a potential new ERP system, the Performance Division will develop and implement a district-wide data governance standard operating procedure. The SOP will be designed to ensure appropriate retention of data and maximize the ease of retrieval. After all, it is of little value to retain data if it's not meaningfully retrieved. The Performance Division will need to consult with stakeholders from all divisions in this process. Development of this SOP will require co-creation throughout the district. Implementation will further require changes in practice in alignment with a potentially new ERP system. Given this, the timeline for completion is 9 to 12 months right now. This is the plan. If there are any questions from committee members, community advisors as it relates to this, we all know this has been a long time coming. We kind of talk about it every audit meeting, so I'm excited to see it.
I'm excited too. This looks great. Any questions, Pierre, from online? Board Member Howard, questions? All right, we're good. Thank you.
Great.
Many thanks.
If there are no further questions at this time, I would like to welcome Lindsay Evans, our Executive Director for Federal Programs, to the podium to share an update on the Federal Programs Corrective Action Plan update. So, welcome, Lindsay.
As a result of the findings received from the cross-functional monitoring conducted last February 6th. The updates are as follows. Indicator 5.1, internal controls, written procedure. The district did not meet evidence that written internal control procedures direct the financial management of the Title I program. To address the finding, federal programs revised our internal control policies and procedures in the following areas: allowability, procurement, conflict of interest, and stipend. The district also remitted a check for expenditures that were deemed unallowable. To ensure the department's written procedures are in alignment with federal and state guidelines, our manuals are updated annually, and as new information is presented by Georgia Department of Education, they are also updated. The team also participates in monthly check-ins as well as webinars provided by Georgia Department of Education. In addition to that, the department submits budget amendments more frequently to Godot for approval, allowability, and alignment to the initiatives in the plan. The next finding was indicator 5.2, which is inventory. It says the inventory logs included purchase equipment that was not reflected in the approved Title IV Part A budget by Georgia Department of Education. As a result of the finding, the department amends budgets on a more consistent basis and aligns the expenditures to allowable and allocable Title IV Part A initiatives. After the budget has been approved by Georgia Department of Ed, federal programs orders the budgeted items, and then the items are added to the inventory log by the school or the department. Please note that federal programs conducts inventory annually, just to ensure that everything is accurate. A check was also remitted for the questioned FY22 expenditure. However, the FY23 budgeted items were deemed approved by Georgia Department of Education. And the final finding was indicator 5.3, cash management. The district did not demonstrate compliance with requirements for the drawdown of funds and completion report submission. The FY22 Title I Part A general ledger provided by the district did not demonstrate a match to several function and object codes on the FY22 Title I completion report. To become compliant, the district revised written procedures for conducting drawdowns and completion reports and included the consolidation of federal funds. The written procedures include actions to be taken, information to be collected, timeline, and person or persons responsible for completing these actions. The district also submitted their FY23 financials to Georgia Department of Education, its Title I department, as well as their financial review department, and we successfully closed out FY23. Additionally, federal programs, budget, and accounting meet regularly to review the budgets, including the consolidated funds and the administrative funds. Also, federal programs and accounting meet monthly to review and discuss drawdowns. The district also submitted a check to Georgia Department of Education. We really believe that cross-collaboration has been instrumental in staying in compliance. The team meets regularly with departments in finance, as well as other divisions in schools throughout the district. Federal programs also works closely with Georgia Department of Education, and the team understands the importance of staying in compliance, and we've made great strides these past several months, and we plan to continue to do so.
Great news. And so you said we're paid up?
We are.
Great news.
Yeah.
Are there any questions from my colleagues online? Nope. Board Member Howard?
Just want to thank you all. I made a request for this update, so I really appreciate it. We know how important these funds are. And just making sure the right things are in place, right checks, and that, is support. So, Godot. Georgia Department of Education, anything you want to add? CFO Bracken?
I do. So Lindsay assumed the role in September, and the department moved to my division in September as well, only about 6 months ago. And so I can say the amount of collaboration just that I've seen in that period has been fantastic. It's been fantastic to be able to see the teams working together. We're coming up with creative solutions for budget. And that's been fantastic. Last shout out to the state, because as we've taken on these new roles, as I've tried to get up to speed on all things federal programs, the level of time and support that they've given us has just been outstanding. And so want to make sure that we give that shout out for that support as well.
And how long are we on this corrective action plan?
So we are actually on it until probably, for another year. We are actually going to be monitored by them in May. So we're hoping that if we have a successful monitoring this go around, we'll be off the high risk designation by Georgia Department of Ed.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we'll be back on the regular 5-year rotation. Yes.
Thank you for that update and for the progress.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. To move forward, I want to circle back, like I promised. Schedule. Federal programs was slated and it was approved for an audit for this year. I would like to recommend that the federal programs audit be removed from this year's schedule for a couple of reasons. First, the review coverage period would overlap with what the Georgia's Department of Education was doing, and they already found deficiencies that the department is working on. So not really seeing the value in having us come in and look at that same period again. So I would like to recommend that this audit be removed from this current year's audit plan. And Pierre, we need a vote for that approval, if you're in agreement.
So I believe both of us are in agreement because there's no need to duplicate work and spend money where you already know what the results are. So can we go ahead and have that, can I call for that motion, Pierre? Is there a motion to remove the federal programs grants and management audit from the school year 2024 audit plan?
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposition? Motion passes.
Thank you. Just so you know that as we explore what our 2025 audit plan looks like, we will consider federal programs. But again, it looks like they're going to be monitored for the next year, so it may not be on the plan for next year either. So just so you know.
Quick question, with the removal of that audit, does that make space to move something else up, or does it just give you the time to manage the portfolio that is already in front of you?
Actually, it gives me more time to manage the portfolio in front of me. We did add the special education audit, and we're still refining that scope, so that may expand. And it also gives me more time for the follow-up corrective action plan project that we've got going on as well.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. We're real excited about the special education audit.
So I'm going to flip through to our last topic for discussion today, and that's our ethics and compliance. Again, just to reiterate, our concerns are received through multiple channels, the hotline, our Let's Talk application system, emails, telephone referrals, and depending on the nature of those concerns, our office may refer some of those reports to other APS departments. For the period December 1st through February 29th, 2024, we received 42 concerns, and 23 of those concerns were referred to the Office of Employee Experience and Performance. Outside the hotline, we received one additional concern, bringing our total number of concerns received and worked within our office to 20. Due to lack of actionable information, no investigations were undertaken for about 65% of those 20 reports. We did have one substantiated claim and 4 unsubstantiated claims, and 2 remained open as of the end of February, but I do believe one of those is already closed at the time of this meeting. So again, just wanted to provide an update on how we're managing the ethics and compliance hotline, just in case you had any questions. If there are no other questions, that completes my presentation for this meeting. So I'll turn it back over to you, Board Chair Baldwin.
Do we have any questions from my colleagues online? Board Member Howard, do you have any questions? So from what you were talking about, it sounds like June is the next time that you will be prepared to come in front of us with presentations. Is that correct?
Yes, the third Thursday in June.
Okay, so if everyone could check the third Thursday in June at our same bat time, same bat station, we should be good to go on that. So June 20th? June 20th is the third Thursday in June. Mark your calendars. Pierre, do we have any public comment? No public comment. Well, if there's no public comment and all business has been handled, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
No, you got to make the
I'm
motion.
sorry, excuse me, I'm skipping ahead. So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
All in favor? Aye. Any opposition? Motion carries. We're adjourned. See you June.